Hi, welcome to the main stage. I'm Aidan Brown, and this is Ricardo Teixeira. And he is a military and defense expert with Protection Web and Defense Web. And he has a very good sound background in information sciences and in research as well. He seems to do very well, especially in those realms, military, defense, borders, all that kind of associated thing. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
We've got so much to talk about today. I'm not going to waste too much time. So let's get straight into it. Let's talk about the state of the South African military. Everybody wants to know. It's a very hot topic at the moment. Obviously, with the rumors going around, not rumors, there's pretty solid evidence that things are falling apart. The wheels are coming off. We have a lot of controversy associated with past actions of the SANDF within our lifetime, referring to Battle of Bangui. And then there's obviously problems that are going on with the SANDF at the moment in DRC and Rwanda. What is your opinion on the state of the South African? Let's just talk about the military for now.
So, with the South African National Defence Force, you've got your three branches: Army, Navy, and then Air Force. And then you've also got the Military Health Services, which is unusual in SANDF. In most militaries, you have a medical brigade under a division level asset, whereas we've got it as an entirely separate branch. There's also the quiet fifth branch of Special Forces, who are separate from the Army, that report directly to the Joint Ops Division, which oversees deployments and all.
And that encompasses the recce's?
Yes. Well, okay. Colloquially still calling it as the recce's, but yeah, it's your 4th and 5th Special Forces regiments. Okay. 5th is based in Palabora, and the 4th is based in Langebaan. They get the nice view of the bay there in Sultana, and they get some nice time at sea when they want. But when we want to talk about the state of the Defence Force, what's currently been in the news lately, most recently, has been the state of the Air Force. There was a report in News 24 that there were only 6 of 330 aircraft that were operable. Now that immediately, gave me a little bit of an aneurysm, because there aren't even 330 aircraft in inventory. They may be on the asset register, but if we are trying to get to that number, then we are including as well, like the Alouettes, the Dakotas, which have been withdrawn from service.
Yeah, grounded aircraft.
Yeah, but also the ones that are at the museum, like the Cheetahs and the Mirages and the Impalas. Like, technically, the Air Force still owns it, but those are not meant to be. They're on display now. So when it comes to the active, or what you can call the inventory fleet, is around 199 aircraft. It's somewhere between 195 and 200. I don't know the exact number, but my colleague Dean Wingren, who is the most premier expert on the South African Air Force, says it's around 199. That was the figure he gave me. And that includes our 26 Gripens, 24 Hawks, 39 Oryx airframes, although 2 were written off, so 37, 30 A109 light utility helicopters, of which 6 have crashed. I think 3 were written off. Then we've also got the 8 BK-117s, 11 Roy Falk. I think there are 10 C-130 airframes that are still in service. I don't know how many of them are even operable. They say 5. One is at Marshall Aerospace at the moment, undergoing an upgrade program. Another is going under the same program at Denel. Denel Aviation only has space to do 1 at a time, so that's why they went with Marshall. There is a third that is going to go to Marshall soon. Then the oldest of the fleet, number 401, is being worked on at Waterkloof Air Force Base. It's the closest to being operable. Yeah. It is important to point out, like, when we talk about the state of the Air Force, I specifically want to talk about number 401 of the C-130s. This is an aircraft that was acquired in 1963.
Okay, it should have been out of service already.
Long ago. And like the C-130 variants, we've got the C-130B and C-130BZ. The latest variant is the C-130J. Yeah. So we're quite far down the list. And it's the oldest of the fleet. We acquired the first 7, 401 to 407 were acquired in 1963. And then we acquired 5 secondhand through the US's Excess Defense Articles Program in 96 to 98. After sanctions, we got another 5 there. But I think there's maybe 5 that could be salvaged and maintained at the current state.
Hypothetically speaking, obviously hypothetically, because I'm going to use the country Wakanda, it doesn't exist. Let's say Wakanda decides to launch an air raid on us tomorrow. Within a space of 24 hours, which would be a pretty slow response to a war move, how many aircraft, real functioning aircraft with real functioning pilots, could we actually get in the air?
So that's a difficult question because there are some aspects to answering that which are classified.
Okay.
Like, so the Gripens, they have a contract to maintain 12 airframes and 12 engines. Okay. So the current policy is for 2 to be ready at any given time. And they have about 54% readiness.
Yeah.
So if we knew the attack was coming, maybe they could get all 12, get the ground crews together and get them all ready, good to go. Because they're kind of parked there, but they're not meant to be ready. So you can get them fueled up. You can get them. Now, the second part, armed. We can't talk about the stockpiles. Again, that's something higher than classified. That is a top secret thing. We don't know what the inventory of weapons are for the Gripens. We know they have IRIS-T missiles, which are a short-range air-to-air missile made by MBDA. But we don't know how big the stockpile is. We know it was an interim solution for Denel's until Denel's A data came into service. It is still not in service. Yeah. And even then, the order for the A data was only for 44 missiles. So again, we're in a point where it's like, okay, if that was your situation, the problem is not going to be pilots. I think there are enough pilots. The currencies are going to be low, but when push comes to shove, I think you're going to try and shove as many people into airframes as possible. The problem is going to be airframes, and the problem is going to be munitions. There is no precision munitions available other than a couple paveway guided munitions, the GBU-12s, which we bought from the US in, I think, 2012. We bought a couple of those. And then there are 10 Lightning II designator pods that we got from Rafale Systems. So we could get about 12 Gripens in the air. And what they'd be armed with is a separate question that I cannot answer. And then we have the Hawks, which are a fighter trainer aircraft, but it can be used in ground attack roles. It doesn't have a radar. It could use IRIS-T missiles because they have their own independent seeker, but it could also just drop unguided munitions and do ground attack roles.
Yeah, we could mount some kind of air defense, but very limited.
Warning. Yes. Thankfully, we don't have an air threat from any of our neighboring countries. Zimbabwe has a couple MiG-21s and some of their own Hawks. Angola's by far got the most impressive air force in the region. They've got a squadron of Sukhoi 30s. Again, what their state is, I don't know. But yeah, if we knew it was coming, because another issue there is our air defense identification zone and the radar network that is used to identify what is flying in, and that is why the jets are all stationed in the north of Limpopo at Air Force Base Mikado, which is known as the Fortress of the North, and that is there to intercept anything that comes into our air defense identification zone. But those radar networks are also from the border war era. I mean, there's some of them at Waterkloof. There's a couple going north. They are. So.
I mean, border war era defense technology in the modern arena is an absolute
it's
joke.
Still something if it's working.
I mean, I understand that. I mean, charging down a person with a fully automatic weapon with a sword is still something in a battle, but in a modern arena, it's hopelessly disappointing. We're at obviously a huge technological deficit. The next question related to this, it's something that taxpayers are very concerned about. It's a very common concern among economists, is given the very capital-intensive nature of rearming these systems, upgrading them, bringing them to modern standards, given that we have no regional threats, and that we couldn't actually do anything at all against the superpower if they did decide to invade us. Should we even be looking at recapitalizing these assets? Does South Africa actually need them?
Yes.
Okay.
Is the short answer. The thing is, people forget that threats have a habit of materializing a lot faster than answers to them and preparations to deal with them. I mean, most European countries weren't keen on expanding their militaries and spending money on it until Russia took Crimea. And then again, 8 years later, they kind of dragged their feet until Russia fully invaded Ukraine. And I think we live in a very different world now, and people are aware that, hey, things are not as stable as they used to be. We've got conflict in Sudan, where a civil war just rapidly broke out. We've got a 20-year-old conflict in the DRC. We have a growing insurgency issue that is getting closer and closer to our borders. We've got global instability. We've got a conflict in Europe. We've got growing conflict in the Middle East and North Africa. We've got the potential for a large-scale conflict in the Pacific. We are not going to be fighting superpowers. I agree on that. But that doesn't mean we don't require a level of preparation where if some sort of threat were to come towards us, that we need to be able to meet it. Now, there's this concept amongst military planners called overmatch. Helmut Heitmann, who's a very famous defense analyst and a bit of a mentor of mine, he notes, he always talks about, I don't want to go to a gunfight with a knife. If you're coming at me with an AK, I want to hit you with a 50 cal from 2Ks away. Just because no one else has it doesn't mean we don't need it. That is, in essence, more incentive for us to have it so that we have a level of capability above everyone else in the region. And we have some force projection capability where if something were to spill out, we could project and with overmatch kind of quell any sort of conflict as a regional security player under the AU and under SADC to prevent any conflict from happening.
It basically allows us a permanent point of force escalation supremacy over a certain realm
deterrence. So there's the principle of deterrence. Another mentor of mine, Dr. Robin Blake, he always likes to say it's two pillars. You got capability and credibility, and they're holding up the roof of deterrence that keeps you out of the rain. But if you don't have the one pillar, you don't have a roof. You need both at the same time. You only have the capability if you have... You only have the credibility if you have the capability. You can't have one without the other.
Yes.
And those are your hard power and your soft power that gives you that sway to say, hey, no. I mean, if we look at neighboring countries, Mozambique doesn't really have an air force, but Zimbabwe does. Botswana has a limited air force. Angola has a large air force. Kenya's got a small but a functional air force. I mean, they've got older aircraft, but they're flying. Rwanda doesn't really have an air force. But then when we get to Ethiopia, Eritrea, that region, I mean, people forget that there was an air war there in the 90s, the mid-90s, Sudan's got an air force. Egypt's got a growing and a large air force. Algeria's got a very large air force. Morocco as well. Mauritania. Everybody else in our region has fighter jets. Do we think we're going to get in a situation where we're going to go head-to-head against them? No. But there is a level of force projection and deterrence that comes from maintaining a fighter capability, which you can see how other countries in our region also believe in.
That's a very interesting perspective, because I deal mainly with social scientists and economists and bankers, and most people, have the exact opposite point of view, and you've really done well to justify your argument. It's quite clear.
Another argument point to the argument that I'd like to make is, I live in a very safe neighborhood. It doesn't mean I don't have a security company, and I don't have fences, and I don't have cameras, and I don't have armed response. Same here.
That's a great analogy.
My neighborhood, I think there was one murder in the last 5 years. I think the most serious crime was someone's fortune was stolen out of the driveway. But every single house has a fence and a security company and cameras.
That makes complete
sense.
And,
the chief of the medical health services said no one will build a house without building walls first. And that is the thing that I want people to remember about the Defence Forces. It's our national insurance policy. Yes, education is important. Policing is important. Healthcare is important, but the first duty of the state is to protect its citizens. That is the whole reason, in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, one of your first needs is safety. That's the whole reason why we formed communities and evolved into forming countries and collective security mechanisms. That is the first duty of the state.
Yeah, look, I not only that, but I believe that the military, Navy, Air Force serves actually a very good social regulator, especially for young men in any society. Young men that leave school have no prospects, no futures, no discipline, as many like many of us tend to. we get into trouble, we make trouble. And I think that the army and the military in some ways actually helps with growing a better workforce, maintaining peace and order. It just gives a little bit of direction and discipline for people that may not otherwise have a community to go to, or something to give them a little bit of focus and direction in life when it's most needed. So I think that it serves more than just that role, though that may be a little bit controversial for some people.
No, I agree with you there. I mean, my wife did her master's on the coming of age ritual of conscription for men under the old South African government, and how a whole generation of men basically marked their entry into manhood by being conscripted, and what it meant for a generation of fathers and uncles. And it's clear that for a lot of them, you weren't really a man until you did your time and you served your country, regardless of whether they agreed with it or wanted to do it. They all had no choice. And I think for a lot of countries, joining the military is not just seen as a way of improving yourself, but serving your country. There's that famous saying by John F. Kennedy, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country.
I am personally a bit torn. I love the idea of the fact that these kind of narratives exist. And on the other hand, I have to be realistic and also understand that the average soldier, average member of our military as it stands now, like our police, also this is going to be controversial. People are going to hate me for this. I'm going to get wiped out on TikTok. The hate mail is going to be off the hook. We have very low quality people on average. We don't do very well. We recruit from a very low base. We don't educate them very well. We don't provide them with a lot of resources. They don't get enough training. And then what we're also starting to see now reflected on the ground, although soldiers are very quiet, I think rank and file makes them speak out very seldomly. But we find ourselves in a position now where they don't have enough rounds to train sometimes. They have run out of medical equipment. There obviously wasn't air support for guys when they needed it. And I'm just wondering exactly how badly are our soldiers doing on a granular level. I've spoken to some military doctors who'd rather not be named, but they say they say even the average health of our soldiers isn't very good. They say we have huge problems with HIV and high blood pressure and diabetes. And this is just like coming from the medical staff. I'm wondering, given that the quality of the soldiers that they're recruiting is often low, they don't get enough training, they don't get enough equipment and that sort of thing. What actually is it like, the granular state of our soldiers' ability to function on the ground on a day-to-day basis? How compromised are they?
So you touched on an interesting point there where, talking about the diabetes and the high blood pressure. Where that comes in is from the fact that our soldiers on average are old. The average age of a deployable soldier in the Defence Force currently is 42 years old. So we on average have a very old Defence Force. I mean, I looked at the age breakdown per rank from 2022. I'm waiting for an updated one. But the calculations I did on there is that 1/3 of the military was under 35. The rest were over 35.
Yeah.
So where that comes from is that there's been a bit of rank stagnation. I've met a couple people.
Same in the police.
In the police as well. I've met way too many privates who are 50 years old or corporals that are 54. I met one gentleman when I was up at the border in November by Musina from 10 Anti-Aircraft Regiment out from Kimberley, who integrated from the South African Coloured Corps and was coming up in retirement, age 60, and he was a corporal. He integrated as a corporal, and he never got promoted his entire time in SANDF, over 30 years. And that is a very common issue. You get a lot of people that kind of get to a point, and then they kind of get left there. And when it comes to the care and the training, there has been, and there was a decision made when they did the amalgamation and the integration that they would lower the standards because there were so many people coming from all the different, we have people come from MK, people coming from Azapo, and from all the different homeland militaries. There was a decision made to lower the standards, but it was not my decision to make. I don't know really whether or not I support it, but I know that there is still quality soldiers that are brought through. There is also a problem of in the recruitment space where the government kind of has this idea that they can solve the youth unemployment issue with the military and with the reserves. Currently, the reserves, a large portion of the reserves, being a reserve soldier is their only form of income. And they're trying to solve this.
What would they earn? I assume next to nothing.
They get paid per day that they're in uniform, but they will maybe be called up for 3 months a year. But they're also exceeding their man days per year for the reserves. Their target is 1.9 million man days. Basically, how many days they can allot from reservists into the military a year, and they've exceeded that by over 100%. They're sitting at around 3.6 million. So. It's at a point where it's clear that like we do not have enough reserves. The reserve force is in essence collapsed and requires a whole new strategy, and it needs to be restructured and rebuilt. They're looking at returning reserve training back to the regiment so that the reserve regiments can do their own recruitment and training at their own bases. But there is still this idea that, you know, they want to take unemployed people and put them in there. But the idea for the reserves is to augment the defense force with specialist skills from the civilian world. And the Defence Force is not a welfare organization. It is a warfare organization. I do support raising standards, and because let's just take the mortarman, for example. Within infantry, a mortarman requires math skills. You know, in the US military, you can't be a mortarman unless you got above a certain mark in your high school maths. Okay, to be a pilot, you need maths and science. To be an artilleryman as well, you need maths and science. You want to go to the Navy, you need, I think, above 60% in maths and science. We need thinking soldiers. We need intelligent soldiers.
This is a problem across the board in the public sector. We've absolutely neglected our education sector for the last 20, 30 years. We neglected a lot of it before that in the apartheid era. I'm not going to take the blame away from that as well. And we've gotten down to the point where we are just happy to recruit from an absolutely dismal base for the public sector. To be a good teacher, you need maths and science. To be a good firefighter, you need maths and science. To be a good policeman, you need maths and science. A soldier, you need maths and science. I mean, what do you not need maths and science for? And we just feed a very low base, and then we don't have a lot of on-the-job training, definitely insufficient. I know in the policing sector it's definitely insufficient. And then the first time you get somebody that's remotely good at their job, they go to the private sector. They're just like gone. They finish up their contract and they don't renew. Why would they? So this is right across the board. We've spoken about the military and we've spoken about the Air Force. I will get to the Navy later. I've clamped that into a different section. But linked to this is the fact that we have a pipeline where we are taking in disenfranchised, largely young men, and we train them how to pull a trigger, act in a little group formation, and we then don't have proper pipelines for these people. You spoke about the inability for them to get upgraded in their career, to get promoted and that sort of thing. Huge problem, stagnation in the ranks. And within the reserves, there's not enough employment opportunity, 3 months of the year, pushing the end of the mandate, hugely problematic. What happens to these people? There's a very common theory. I certainly buy into it when I watch the nature and sophistication of cash and transit robberies in South Africa and the like. I believe that these are fueled by the South African Defence Force, that you have young men coming out of maybe not just South African military, but regional African militaries. They got nowhere to do, nowhere to go, nothing to do. They got all the skills in the world, and they've gotten really, really good at this. And do you see the same thing, or do you think that there's no real data or evidence to?
I don't see much evidence in that regard. I know that, look, there have been instances where cash and transit people have been, robbers have been caught, and they are, serving police officers, or they're using military weapons, or they are a former soldier. But there's not enough instances for me to say that the correlation equals causation. There is, one thing that I thought you were going to mention with this is, using soldiers to protect cash in transit, because that is something that happens in, like, Ireland, for example, and I think it would be a waste of the soldiers' resources and their skills. There is also, seems to be currently a downward trend in cash in transit heists. I remember the last quarterly police statistics, there were only 17. Business robbery is also going down quite a bit, and it's seen as this very big mark of violent crime. But I think there are more pressing crime issues as well that are not really my area of expertise, but where, I mean, there's a lot of gun crime and a lot of robberies and shootings, but that is more a result of just the proliferation of firearms on the street and the police's inability to maintain and keep their own security on their firearms. And I spoke to Andy Fuller, who's a gunsmith and a firearms expert, and he notes about, in a lot of robberies, in instances where security companies are robbed, the first thing the criminals do is take their guns, and especially in cash and transit scenarios, the first thing they'll do is take the guards' guns. So there is a firearm problem as well that drives the issue, but I wouldn't say it's the problem with the defense force is when people join, they're kind of staying for life. Not many people leave. That's why we've got an issue where we've got guys that are 42 and 45 and are still privates and corporals and sergeants. Currently right now, there's no such thing as a short-term service in the defense force. You come in, you sign a contract, and you kind of belong to them until you're 60, and you can stay until then. So short-term service contracts are definitely something that they need to bring in, but the cash in transit, there is a problem there, and I think there is a way for police and for the private security to deal with the issue. But it is also an entirely separate topic for another video that we could go into.
Yeah, your explanation makes complete sense. I was wondering if it was just something that people had kind of come up with. I guess I bought into that myself. They just look very sophisticated in some videos, the way they operate. It almost looks like they've got... so I guess I kind of jumped to a conclusion on that without having real data. I had a feeling there wouldn't be much data on that.
Criminals themselves are becoming more sophisticated. I mean, if you look at the way robberies are being conducted, hits are being conducted, and just the proliferation of cybercrime, criminals themselves are becoming more sophisticated, in not just in South Africa, but globally.
I'm going to move on, but before I do, I'm actually going to touch on something that you may or may not wish to speak about. I've asked a number of crime experts and investigative journalists and that sort of thing, and most people don't want to speak about this. I'm very happy to talk about this. Is the use of what appears to be special forces soldiers for hire in some regard. There was Colonel Matipa, who was assassinated with just the most spectacular fashion. I mean, I hate to say this. I mean, it's an absolute
shot.
Yeah, like the kind of shot that I have friends that are lifetime hunters and marksmen, for that matter of fact, gong marksmen. And I don't think any of them could have made that shot. And I think that he was shot twice.
From a moving vehicle, in a moving vehicle, at about 80 k's an hour, approaching an off-ramp.
The most insane, just the
10
most insane.
kilometers from their training ground.
Very, very sophisticated.
So, I mean, my dad always, I've spoken to him about this, and he says I must be careful because, if they were willing to kill a Hawks colonel, they wouldn't hesitate to kill a journalist.
They're not going to worry about your.
There is an open secrets investigation on this, and there is an ongoing investigation. I mean, they killed the Hawks colonel who was investigating them. I don't think the Hawks closed the case. I think that they definitely, the investigation is ongoing. I don't know much about it. I can only really speak on what Open Secrets revealed and what allegations there are, that there is a rogue special forces unit. I wouldn't say they're for hire, but rather that they are a unit within special forces and SANDF that kind of has their own agenda and are using their skills for profit and are involved supposedly with some sort of smuggling through the Kruger Park. I don't have a lot of evidence, and not a lot of it is public. And it is, again, it's very sensitive. So I think a lot of people are hesitant to talk on it because no one really wants to also catch a bullet to the head.
Yeah, there's a huge liability around this. I have a conspiracy theory, and I'll give you my conspiracy theory, and then we'll move on from this very quickly. My theory is that there's a couple of Southern African countries, namely and primarily Zimbabwe and South Africa, could be Mozambique and others, Botswana even, that have a network with high-powered individuals that are in the realm of gold refinement and trade, or in tobacco refinement and trade. Tobacco obviously does very well growing in the Southern African region. It's easy to liquidate because every little small vendor across the Southern African region liquidates your money for you 10 Rand at a time. And I believe that we have politicians, that we have high-powered business people that are linked to the capacity to utilize military assets when they want to, and that this is all part of the gold mafia documentary, where we have a huge trade, politicians at the top who are helping to push the movement of tobacco, money, gold. And these guys obviously have some authority over the military assets in their own countries. So when I talk about top politicians, I mean guys at the very, very top. We have a lot of politicians in South Africa that wear very, very nice Rolexes and Patek Philippe's. They get paid well, but not that well. That's all I'm going to say. And again, it's a conspiracy theory. So just bear in mind. And I don't expect you to comment on that at all.
So, one thing that I can say is that there is definitely some sort of network. I don't know about involvements across country with other nations and our neighbors, but the believed rogue squad, under the open secrets investigation, does note that a certain high-ranking general in the defense force was in a room with them when they interrogated and tortured a person that was supposed to be a crime intelligence informant that was supposed to be assisting them in finding some lost firearms, and they wanted him to help fabricate evidence to frame a high-ranking ANC individual. So there does seem to be some sort of political game happening. And I mean, we all know about Zuma and the State Security Agency and how they were used to protect him. I wouldn't be surprised, but I haven't seen any evidence. I've heard a lot of allegations, very little evidence. But ultimately, with the nature of these sorts of things, I'm just a journalist. There are certain things that I'm going to leave to the Hawks, and this is something that I'm going to leave to the Hawks.
Yeah, no, I definitely, I'm not picking up the phone to call anyone. Yeah. I love my dogs too much. Well, we can. I guess this is a good link to the next question. The Firearms Control Act 2000 did moderately well in some senses. I'm not going to talk about the enforcement of the Firearms Control Act 2000. That's been an absolute disaster. But the regulation itself made some kind of sense, actually, to try and clean up the obvious problems we have with too many firearms in the South African market, legal and illegal. What happened as a result of this is people found a hole where they could actually obtain and take control of their own private security companies, and they could use these as little kind of proxies to, sort of like go about and be like muscle for people. For example, you get out to some nightclubs. I'm not a big club guy, but in some nightclubs they have guys with like shotguns at the door, enforcing. And what happens is there's been a little bit of manipulation of the system. And I just want to know what you think the risks are in terms of civil defense in relation to this manipulation of security companies. Like, you can get a guy who has a criminal record, can't own a firearm, but what he can do is he can be a director in a security company, for example, or something like that. I'm not sure exactly how the regulation works. Or he can be a shareholder, or he can own it, and then all of a sudden he has access to, this kind of very scary muscle for hire. So
there has been a lot of allegations again, and general uptick in calls for CSIRO to crack down on these sorts of things, and they have. So CSIRO is the Private Security Industry Regulatory Authority, and from my dealings with private security companies, I generally deal with the more professional and disciplined and legitimate companies, the ones that have good reputations. I know of a couple with the bad reputations. I won't mention any names because, again, I don't want to catch a bullet. But there is, from my interactions, a lot of people have said, Syra isn't pulling their weight. There is a lot of criminality. A lot of security companies that I've spoken to have pointed out that they lose business to other companies because they will employ people and kind of informally. So they'll bring in people that are from other countries, Malawi, Zimbabwe, and have them as security guards, and they'll say that they don't speak the local language, so there's a bit of a barrier there. But they pay them unfairly. They don't treat them well. They're not fully qualified, and even getting qualified, there's a lot of corruption around that. Like, you can go get qualified, and you kind of just there's a big problem with the training companies where you kind of just, with some of them, you can, and I've been told this by multiple people, even some people who have friends that in the industry that do this, where they'll have security company and you can get qualified as a security guard, but you don't actually go to do the courses. They kind of just put your name down on the thing and kind of forward your qualification. And then, you're a qualified security guard and you can have a security company, and, they kind of cut a lot of corners, and because of that can charge a lot less than the legitimate companies who kind of get squeezed out. And again, as you say, there's been a lot of allegations. I mean, Mark Liffman, who was killed earlier this year, had a security company, and the two people that were caught and believed to have killed him were security guards.
Yeah, I saw that.
And yeah, I mean, even Nafiz Modek is currently on trial. He's just got a security company.
100%.
And I mean, there's extortion around the clubs in Pretoria and the Linwood Strip, not far from where I stay, that is apparently being done through security companies again. And yes, there is a level of criminality in the private security industry where there have been loopholes and there has been a lack of oversight, and the criminal elements have come in and taken over a corner of the market. And that is why, I think the most crucial thing there is Syra needs to start. I don't know if I can swear on this, but
oh yeah, absolutely.
Syra needs to get their shit together.
Yeah. No, I mean, like any of our state regulators, I suppose that the private security industry is absolutely mushroomed over the last 30 years in the absence of SAPS, basically.
So there's about 459,000 private security guards in South Africa.
Oh, wow.
But crucially, I think less than 10% actually carry a firearm.
Yeah.
Under that, those are your guys at the mall that just have a radio and a baton, or people that, guard a parking lot, or they man a boom, or they're a guard at the entrance for a building. Very few of them actually carry guns. But there is an element within the private security industry that is illegitimate, but is seeming legitimate.
Bouncing agencies, basically nightclub bouncers, and very unscrupulous clusters of individuals found a loophole in the system, and they managed to get themselves upgraded from knuckle dusters and steroids to 9mm. Very impressive manipulation of the system, but that quite clearly is the loophole in the Firearms Control Act 2000, and then in the Private Security Industry Regulatory Authority. They're obviously not able to effectively undertake their mandate. I've heard that they suffer from the same problems as the NPA, for example, where they're just completely resource depleted. They just don't have enough people, don't have enough numbers, don't have enough systems. So I have heard that as well.
The NPA is one that truly frustrates me, because we have, and I had a conversation with Ian Cameron about Operation Chanela, where it's, it looks impressive to say, we arrested 13,000 people this week, but that doesn't translate into prosecutions. And the detectives in those areas that suddenly get a massive surge in case dockets dumped on them, suddenly, they'll already be working on like 80 to 100 cases maybe. Then Operation Chanela comes through their district and they suddenly get assigned another 100 cases. And Operation Chanela, yes, it looks good. It looks good that they're arresting all these people, but it is not translating into successful prosecutions.
I think, even if it was 80 plus 100, those are Western Cape numbers. Gauteng, KZN, Limpopo, Eastern Cape, many detectives, the majority.
Working over 300 dockets.
3 to 600. Yeah. I spoke to one or two guys, I don't want to mention his name because he's still in the service, where they're active, where they've got guys with literally 500 to 600 dockets.
Yeah. And there is a huge problem in our police service with the detectives, and one thing that still deeply frustrates me is that within SAPS, before you got to be a detective, before you can be a detective, you have to walk the beat for 2 years. Now, there is no like skills transfer from being a police officer on the street to become a detective. They're two completely different skill sets. And I would love for the police force to realize that, unfortunately, someone coming out of university with a BA, people will laugh at someone with a BA general, but someone that studies anthropology, sociology, and psychology and criminology is 10 times more equipped to be a police detective than someone that's just walked the beat for 2 years. And crucially, they can already use Microsoft Word.
Absolutely. I think that the way that we educate and upgrade our detectives through the ranks is one of the biggest contributing factors to the diaspora to private sector.
Yeah, there needs to be a professionalization of the police service, and specifically the detectives, where they need to understand that being a detective is separate from being a beat officer or being a tactical response officer, and it requires a different skill set, a different training pipeline, but also a different entry mechanism and a different recruitment method.
We've killed our... It's a very difficult thing to educate a detective because you can bring them through a criminology degree. You can even have them do a diploma in forensics afterwards. They still require an apprenticeship to some degree. You still require a senior detective to walk you through the job for a couple of years till you really become competent, because there's an element that can't be trained in.
And not just that, there's an element of like personal mindset and analytics that comes with it, where it's certain things, like not everybody can be a doctor, and it's not just about your school marks. But I mean, for example, I can't stand like if I watch videos of surgeries, it makes me nod. I've got an uncle who's a brilliant engineer, but the smell of a hospital makes him want to faint. There are just some things that can't be taught. There are just some things that you're born with a skill set that makes you particularly good at something, and our society needs to learn to enable those sorts of things.
Yeah, I completely agree. We just haven't done very well to facilitate the correct development of people in these priority positions. It's a tough job to be a South African detective. But definitely going back to the issue with Ian Cameron, I think I heard him speaking on the same topic, and the shuffle of taking these guys off, and they don't come off the streets, and there's no sentencing and nothing happens. It must be just endlessly frustrating. And again, when people don't see results, they're more likely to leave and just go to private sector. And then we get left with the riffraff. The good ones leave, and the rubbish stays behind, and you eventually just end up with an institution filled with rubbish.
There are still some very good police officers, and again, in SANDF, despite its failures, there are still some outstanding and phenomenal soldiers. The senior NTO corps and the junior and mid-level officer corps in both SANDF and in the police, that mid-level of your warrant officers, your sergeants, your lieutenants, captains, majors, there are still some phenomenal people there, and some of the best officers I've met have been lieutenant colonels, and majors in SANDF, but unfortunately they've been in that rank for way too long, but are still within the organization and doing the best with what they can and doing a stellar job.
Yeah, we definitely don't give them enough. Whatever they're doing it on the absolute bare minimum of resource allocation. We know that now teachers as well. I mean, teachers, nurses, doctors in public hospitals and public schools, they do the most with the least, and they often go unappreciated. It's very difficult to speak about this, because you go to a police station, and on a, let's call it a public-facing level, they're absolutely terrible. And unless you're in a position like yours or mine, you will never get to meet, or you'll seldom get to meet these incredible people that actually get results in the background. You're mainly dealing with the one lazy guy in the front of the police station.
And it's very unfortunate. And another thing is that both SAPS and SANDF are very bad at public communications and public management. Like
SANDF, though, to some extent should be, if that makes any sense. I would almost expect it, because they don't have that much public-facing interaction. But the police, oh man, it's hopeless.
But see, there's a whole aspect towards defense communications, what you call PSYOP, psychological operations, where look at how other militaries, I will point anyone towards it. the Australian Defence Force's YouTube channel or the British Armed Forces YouTube channel. Just see how these other professional militaries are engaging with the public through social media, and how they're able to own the narrative. And in essence, it does a lot of your recruitment work for you, and it helps educate the public about what you do and generates public support. And with everything that happened in the DRC, I mean, we're very much the legitimate party there, who's been, our troops are being held by a non-state actor that is supported by a country that is violating their neighbor's sovereignty. But the information war has been completely lost by SANDF. The Rwandan and the M23 information machine has run circles around them. And I am in contact with some of the people at Defence Corporate Communications, and I have a lot of respect for them, but they are woefully inequipped for what they need to be doing and for what they should be doing. I mean, the amount of press releases that we've gotten from them throughout the whole thing, I can count on one hand. Their response times, how they've been able to give information, the clarity on the information that they've given is shocking, to be honest.
You're actually right. They have left a lot of room for speculation.
Yeah.
They haven't been very clear with the public. People have just been kind of left to form their own decisions. We've actually gone to people such as yourself.
You mean, they've got a team of experts and spokespersons, but I'm the one that has to go on the news and tell people that no, there aren't 6 planes flying, that there is more than that, and it's a very complex situation.
You raise an amazing point. I actually have only just realized this, that I go to private analysts
Exactly.
for SANDF News. Very interesting. I'd like to move on. This is something I've been actually dying to ask somebody for quite a long time. We're talking about the use of private security companies as proxies, and I'll say something a little bit controversial, and you can tell me whether it's rubbish or there's something to this. In the Battle of Bangui, somewhere around 2012, 2013, it is my belief that the only reason we had soldiers on the ground active at that time in that war zone, in that arena, was because they were there to protect the private assets of high-ranking ANC officials. And I don't think they had any other business there, being there in that war zone at the time, given South Africa's mandate at that time. So,
there's a long, cloudy history there. One thing I can say is that, look, there hasn't been any evidence of, especially in the DRC now, people are saying, they're protecting mining interests. The UN Security Council report is over 600 pages long. There is an entire section on mining in the eastern DRC.
Yeah.
There is not a single sentence that mentions the ANC or Cyril Ramaphosa. That entire section is about the illegal gold mining that M23 is using to fund their operations and how they're exporting gold out of the DRC. Same with the Central African Republic. There may have been private interests at play, but it's not clear what they were. The soldiers were definitely there on behalf of an order issued by then President Zuma. It's not clear what the purpose of it was, but he was assisting in essence, a fellow African leader to remain in power in a way. What the true motivations behind it was, I would love to know, but it's not very clear what exactly it is. I know people will jump to it's because they're protecting ANC mines. Yeah. If there was evidence of that, I would tell you. But I have not seen a single grain of evidence.
I don't think it's taking place now.
Yeah. What could be a possibility, especially in the DRC now, is that, and it's how Wagner is being paid by other African countries when they offer security assistance, is that they're offered the possibility of mining concessions once stability is reached. That is a possibility. But again, that would only be something that would be viable once there is stability, which hasn't happened, and I haven't seen any evidence of it.
I'm not a mining or mineral expert by any stretch of the imagination, but in that region on the border of Rwanda and DRC, there's certain minerals, I could be mistaken, tantalum or tungsten or something like that.
Gold, coltan, cobalt, copper, diamonds.
There's one or two in particular that are almost exclusively only found in that region that are required for semiconductors. Coltan.
Coltan's found in your cell phones. There's also cobalt, but also copper is becoming increasingly like important in terms of for solar panels and for the electrification, and copper is just a very important mineral, but also so is gold. Gold is always going to be valuable, and it's a very, very effective conductor. And I would encourage people to look at Rwanda's mines and their mining output versus how much they're actually exporting. Those numbers do not add up.
Not match. The rumor for the longest time is obviously Rwanda's taking minerals from DRC, they're crossing over the border, and then they're passing them off as their own with inflated.
The UN Security Council's report, which I'll send to you, you guys can pull out the map that's in the report, and you can use it in this when it goes up. That shows a literal route, which shows you where they're mining around Lake Kivu, the route they're taking to go out, where M23 is, where Rwandan surface-to-air missile systems are active, and where Rwandan electronic jamming is active. And all of these things, if you overlay them, are the same area.
Yeah, there's again, I don't want to like buy into a conspiracy theory or anything, but the global trade in conductor metals actually to some extent relies on insecurity in that area and dysfunction in that area. I mean, you can imagine if Rwanda and DRC got together tomorrow and decided to be the two most aligned, most organized governments in the world.
I think, given their history, that's very far away.
It's not likely, but
not in my lifetime.
That's way worse than a war zone where minerals are just going to flow out anyway.
I think, given the fact that that area of the world is just so wild and untapped, and there's just so much potential there is going to be conflict around it. I mean, even the southern parts of the DRC and the Katanga province, I mean, there was issues there in the 60s, 70s. For decades, there were issues there. And the uranium and the plutonium that was used in the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki came from Katanga. The uranium that runs the North Korean regime's weapons program is rumored to have come out of Katanga. The DRC is a very large place with a lot of untapped resources, and unfortunately a lot of countries are eyeing it. And I think the growing instability, and a lot of people will ask, why is South Africa there? The DRC is a large trading partner for us within the region, but also in order to maintain some stability there, it's very much in our interest, because if there is a humanitarian crisis and a large-scale conflict, if you look at the global migration routes, everybody always sees, from North Africa and the Middle East, people are trying to get to Europe, but below the Sahel, they have what they call the southern route, and people are trying to get here.
Of course.
And if there is a massive cross-border multinational conflict that happens in that region, that pulls in Tanzania, that pulls in Zambia, pulls in the DRC, Rwanda, Uganda, Central African Republic, Angola, a lot of those civilians are going to flee, and they're likely going to come here. And I don't blame them. They're just trying to survive. In South Africa, they have an option where they can be safe, they can find work, there is healthcare, there is access to education, there is a promise of prosperity. And I think until there is stability in the region, where those countries and their people are able to thrive in their own countries and to grow, then that is, they're going to try and catch up, which is why I think it's in our best interest to actually be there and to assist and to work together as a regional bloc to maintain stability and security, so that we all grow together. So we either grow together or we fall together. There's that famous African phrase, I think it's a Kenyan phrase, that if you want to go far, go alone. Sorry, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. And again, the concept of Ubuntu and Pan-Africanism, I'm very much a proponent of that. I think we need to, as African countries, work together.
I mean, that's a completely separate conversation. I actually don't want to go into that. Pan-Africanism, it's just so broad. It brings on so many benefits, like trade benefits and economic benefits and that sort of thing, but it also raises a lot of issues around security. And one of the chief issues around the Pan-Africanism thing, obviously raised around the argument that Julius Malema brought up, because he's obviously a huge proponent of Pan-Africanism in terms of reducing barriers to border crossing. I definitely want to talk about South Africa's capacity to protect its borders at the moment and where we are with that, and also its maritime borders. I'd like to separate them out as two separate things. So, for example, people are incredibly worried about the issues with the borders in Mozambique and Zimbabwe, and ephedrine and methamphetamine coming across, and the gun trade and human trafficking and all that.
It's a big issue. I've taken some trips up to the border. I have one upcoming soon, hopefully, to Lebombo at Mozambique. I was at Musina in November. The big problem with our border with Zimbabwe is that it's a riverbed, and it's a seasonal river. On a good year, there's a river for 45 days of the year. In a bad year, it could be less than 30. So it's very difficult to patrol. It's very porous by its very nature. It's literally 200-meter wide stretch across the whole region, and it's just flat and sandy, and it's very easy to walk across. I stood there in the middle of the riverbed with a platoon of soldiers and the commander of the operational area, and other side were a bunch of people just sitting and looking at us, and they didn't seem phased at all. But while we were there, and I was actually chatting to the one sergeant because of the prevalence of the donkeys that are there, and how they're used to smuggle goods across the border. And while we were having this conversation, a gentleman passed literally between us carrying buckets. I took a photo of him and walked across as if we weren't even there. And they laughed and said, look, it's not their responsibility to stop people going out. It's their responsibility to stop people coming in. It's Zimbabwe's responsibility to stop him on the other side, but there was no one from the Zimbabwean authorities on the other side. So there was a fence along the border east of Musina in what is called the Soutpansberg military area. It was an electrified fence, which at some points under the old government, the voltage was turned up to the point where it was potentially lethal to touch the fence. But a flood in, I think, 1996, a flash flood in the river wiped it out. So there's, people will say, just build a wall, or like Aidan McKenzie says, put them on a bus and drive them back there. I would encourage him to go and have a look there, because 600 meters west of Bait Bridge, where they would have to cross, was an informal bridge made with sandbags, because the water was only that deep for people to cross. It is a very difficult area to patrol. I think the only way that we can really patrol that area is through the integration of electronic sensors and cameras. I know Vumacam at the Border Management Conference proposed, that's how their camera network works around Joburg. It could be integrated along the border, along with ground penetrating radar and surveillance radar and long range cameras like the Meerkat system that is made by CSIR, which can surveil a very wide area.
A fleet of drones that just measures infrared.
So the ideal way for us to do it would be to have, you have your outposts and then have platoons that are under sections, small sections.
Yes, of course. Responsible for a certain length of...
And not just that, but to have the camera and there's also the idea of a fiber optic cable that runs under the ground that can feel when someone steps over, that then alerts the nearest outpost, and then all the cameras and everything in that region that pick up that are focusing on potential movement there. And once movement is picked up, you vector a drone to come in and have oversight with... its infrared camera and illuminate through infrared exactly where the people are. So if this is happening at night, soldiers' night vision can go and intercept and prevent people from crossing.
We definitely need to leverage technology. There simply aren't enough soldiers to...
And they are not. There's only a battalion, so 4 companies under 4 different sectors. The entire Zimbabwe sector is just 1 company of soldiers, so less than 200 soldiers for just that entire area. But ultimately, no matter how good of a system we set up, people are still going to try and cross as long as they think that they have better opportunities in South Africa and they are not able to thrive in their home country. And I said this to the spokesperson of the DOD, Sipiwe Dlamini, who was there with us that day, and I said to him, there's not a military solution to our border crisis. There can only be a political solution. And it's going to take political solutions in not just South Africa, but in the home countries, where our governments are going to have to sit down and solve their own problems and again, get their shit together. No matter how many soldiers we put at the border, they are not going to be able to stop people. Unless you literally take every single soldier we have and they stand there hand in hand 24/7 as a human wall, we are not going to be able to stop people from crossing.
That's a very, very interesting comment. That'll make an amazing soundbite. Yeah, the area, it's just the sheer vastness of South Africa's border. Unfortunately, the way that global maps are set out with the curvature of the earth, they don't represent South Africa's geography properly.
Yeah.
So when you look at South Africa on a map, you don't realize just how broad those
And not just
borders
that,
are.
our area of responsibility. I mean, you brought up the maritime border. South Africa's exclusive economic zone is 1.5 million square kilometers. Our area of search and rescue responsibility extends through the Mozambique Channel from Tanzania and Mozambique all the way down to out towards Reunion Island, where we have Marion and Prince Edward Islands there, and then all the way down to the Arctic, up past South Africa and into Namibia's territorial waters, where we are responsible for search and rescue off there as well. So we have an incredibly large area of responsibility in terms of the maritime domain and the aerial domain, because the search and rescue is not only done by ships, but also through aerial assets. So our Air Force, and it's their role to assist the South African search and rescue, South African National Search and Rescue Foundation, SASA or something, or SAMSA, the Maritime Safety Authority. It's the Air Force's responsibility to assist, and the Navy's responsibility to assist with search and rescue at sea. And they just do not have the assets for it.
We have this problem with people that are crossing into South Africa using the land borders mainly for subsistence purposes or just to survive, find some kind of basic opportunities in life. You will definitely be getting criminal elements that will be making use of the same systems to move gold or drugs or guns, or especially people. Now human trafficking is the big one. And every now and then we get a little bit of a bust on a border. They get a couple of bales of dacha, or they catch a busload of people, and they're very proud of this. And I especially see they'll get like a boatload of like drugs coming into Durban Harbour, and all the cops are there for their photo day, and the politicians are out, and everybody's wearing their fancy suits, and it looks absolutely amazing. Our entire coastline is completely unpatrolled. It is completely unmonitored. If you have sophisticated organizations, which we know is the case, South Africa has become a global trade hub for drugs, for the passing trade of drugs. They come into South Africa and then they get ferried out to the rest of the world.
We're a transit zone.
Yeah, we're a transit zone. And the fact that our border security agency are so stupid.
I wouldn't say that. Look, the BMA is a fairly new organization.
Yeah.
And they're doing a very good job. But again, they also are at a point, because they're not even 2 years old. I think April 1st is going to be their second birthday.
Yeah.
The Border Management Authority's got a very difficult time right now, because they're having to argue for their mandate and to kind of prove themselves so that they can get their own budget.
Yeah.
So last year they operated with a shortfall of 4.1 billion rand. And I think Dr. Matjiu is doing a fantastic job there. And they remember, they're taking it over from the police, who are not doing the best job there.
I actually named them unfairly, to be honest. I just kind of used that.
But the Border Management Authority is doing, in my opinion, a very good job with what they are able to do. This year they've asked for a budget of 4.6 billion. But what they're actually just asking for is to be appropriately funded.
Yeah.
And they're also leading the way when it comes to public-private partnerships and leveraging technology. I mean, they've been leasing drones and working with private security companies that operate drones. They operated drones over Bait Bridge and Labomba over December. They intercepted quite a few people. Yeah. And they are doing a great job at the ports of entry. I mean, they're taking over from the police soon, starting to at OR Tambo as well. So their role extends to 10 kilometers out to sea and inland from the borders as their area of responsibility. And they're supposed to be working with the military. But again, the BMA is a relatively new organization, but they are, in my opinion, probably doing not only the best that they can, but they're in some areas they're succeeding. And I have a lot of hope for the BMA, and I have some friends in the BMA, and I'm looking forward to seeing how the organization grows.
I did hear one of their spokespersons, or their spokesperson, quite recently, and he was very frank, he was very pragmatic, he was very honest when he spoke about the issues that they were having. I did unfairly name them, but what I was trying to actually get at is this what we very often see is a media parade on small victories. And what I'm most concerned about the fact is that they'll have a little unit of SAPs or whatever it is doing their little sting at Durban Harbour, and we don't know exactly what the statistics are. I believe they're getting very, very few of those shipments.
It's a drop in the bucket. We're catching it with a sieve.
Yeah, I mean, very, very few. But our entire border is open. I mean, what would just stop a tiny little fishing vessel from pulling up on the coast and just ferrying their drugs?
I won't mention the country who told me this, but because I interact a lot with the military attaché corps in Pretoria, and one of the attachés informed me that the weekend before the election last year, this is a country which has an information sharing role with South Africa. They received information that a dhow, which is a traditional wooden sailing boat that you kind of see in the Middle East that are about 50 meters long, a dhow had been, they'd received information that a dhow had left Pakistan, headed towards South Africa through the Indian Ocean with 500 kilograms of methamphetamine on board. And the instruction was to share the information with the South African National Defence Force, but to first ask if they had assets in the region that would be able to intercept. If not, it would be shared with another country that did have assets in the region. But because of the nature of the relationship, they felt they needed to extend a hand out and say, hey, South Africa, this is coming your way. Do you want to deal with this? Unfortunately, he spent the whole weekend trying to get them on the phone, and nobody was interested. And this was right before an election. There was a very clear victory on a silver platter being handed over. And, I informed him that even if they had answered the phone, that we didn't have assets in the region. But this was one simple incident in a greater series of incidents where we are seeing drugs, methamphetamine and heroin comes out through the Pakistan and through the Golden Triangle in Southeast Asia, and it makes its way through the maritime domain across to either Tanzania or Mozambique, and then over land into South Africa, and then out again to Durban Harbour, or it comes into KZN covertly and then into the harbour, and again transits and then gets back out towards Australia and other parts of Asia or towards Europe. And then we have cocaine coming from South America into South Africa as well, also being dropped off. Yeah,
they just off the coast.
Off the coast with floating bales, and then they exchange them onto fishing boats, and then they get them back in, and then again back out through a legitimate harbour, smuggled onto a container, or through small routes on planes, and sent back out again.
I lived in a small coastal town, and let me tell you, you wouldn't even have to use a small vessel. You could get a nice sized luxury yacht coming and going. No one would notice you or stop you.
And the problem there is South Africa lacks a coast guard, but the Navy also lacks a what's called an offshore patrol fleet.
We've got no boats, basically. We've got
not for this role.
Okay, but I've heard we've got almost no boats in the water for almost any role anymore, including big ships.
So we have the 4 frigates, which would, in my opinion, if they don't go for a midlife upgrade on them,
only one's operational. Is that
at the current moment? One was on operations off the coast under Operation Copper. It was SAS Amatola. I had the privilege of being aboard her during a maritime exercise.
I'd love to do that
in October for Epsomar with India and Brazil.
Yeah, you get to do some quite cool things. That's pretty cool. Yeah.
It was. I spent the day on the Indian vessel, but I did in the lead up to the exercise get to board the Amatola as well. It's a fantastic ship. It's a MECO A200 class built by ThyssenKrupp Marine Systems from Germany. It's truly a magnificent ship, and I think we should have bought more of them. I know there was an argument to be made at the time of the acquisition for 6, but we went for 4. I think 6 would have been a good deal. But these are now ships that are coming towards the end of their life cycle. They're 15 to 20 years really in their current configuration.
Is that all you get?
Kind of, yeah. Okay. You'd be lucky with any defense platform to get 20 years.
But airplanes you get usually a bit longer.
With the fighter jet, and with helicopters as well, it's roughly 8,000 to 10,000 hours. Flight hours.
I'm not sure how long that would be.
And that depends on how often you use them. Yeah. But for most things, you usually when you get to that point, you do a midlife upgrade where you refit the essential systems. Like with the ships, you want to do the engines, you want to do the radar, you want to do basically everything in the bridge gets replaced. The things that run the ship, the ship systems, and even the weapon systems get an upgrade. So there was a decision in 2016 that the Navy's fleet of frigates would benefit from a midlife upgrade. And I think if they don't do it within the next 3 years, then it's going to be time to start either replacing or retiring. So, yeah, the Navy does not have enough ships, and the ships it does have are not active enough. They just received their third inshore patrol vessel, the Warrior class of vessel from Darwin that were built in Cape Town. It was a fantastic contract, in my opinion, because the social impact of Darwin's operation, I mean, the amount of suppliers that they created down the stream, because there weren't companies that could supply them, and they found people with skills and put them together and started companies that are now self-sustaining and providing services in other industries. Darwin's done a very good job there. But again, 3 inshore patrol vessels is not enough. Ideally, and these are ships that can't go out into the blue water. These are inshore, so they're in that 12-kilometer zone off the coast, doing that constabulary role.
That's where we
ships.
really need.
And they need to be around the ports, but the fleet. There is an option under the contract for Project Bureau for a 4th vessel that needs to be exercised, but that's going to cost another 1.2 billion rand, which Treasury will have to cough up. But again, 4 is still not going to be enough. I think I've spoken to the Chief of the Navy, and he's expressed that ideally what he would like to see is a fleet of 15 to 18 inshore patrol vessels and 12 to 16 offshore patrol vessels. Darwin also won the tender for the offshore patrols, but they were never handed the contract. It was very controversial at the time because it was they tried to award it to a joint venture between Denel and a Chinese company that were actually excluded from the process because one of the requirements for the tender was it needed to be a proven vessel, and all they had was a 3D rendering.
Do we have a lot of problems? I'm not sure, you may or may not know about this, with foreign fishing in our
Yes,
waters?
there is, and that is another argument for the offshore patrol vessels and why we need them, is that there is a lot of overfishing from fishing. We just cannot patrol our EEZ.
I heard somebody say Chinese vessels.
And Chinese
we're
vessels
so
are
far
not
away
just
from China.
it's not just us. This is a global problem. You got
Yeah.
Chinese vessels that are illegally fishing off South America.
Yes, that's why I
Africa.
asked the question, because I know about it in other regions.
China has what they call it China's naval militia. It is this network and giant global fleet of fishing vessels which carry military communications equipment, and it is something that the Americans are particularly concerned of in a potential war with China, is that they've got their official naval fleet, which is pretty large. It's the largest fleet in number of ships, not in tonnage. That's a different conversation. Then they have their Coast Guard fleet, but then they also have this third fleet, this network of fishing ships, which could be literal
Turned into
national international militia.
It could be weaponized.
It could very easily
very
be weaponized,
quickly.
but it provides a level of intelligence gathering and if you wanted to blockade an area, you could, in theory, blockade an entire area like the Red Sea or off our coast around the Cape of Good Hope with just these vessels.
If each ship, Chinese ship, represented its own little communication station, suggested by the fact that they have this communications equipment, military grade communications equipment.
It's not all, but there have been very strong allegations that a lot of them have fitted out with it.
I mean, that would in itself be military grade communication system.
The Russians have been doing it as well with with tankers and ships that keep dragging their anchors by accident across the Baltic Sea.
Please talk about that, because that's not even in here.
People need to remember one thing: the Baltic Sea is not very deep.
Yeah.
Its deepest point is 400 meters. Its average is around 30
because that
meters.
cable's been cut twice now.
There've been several incidents.
Several. Okay,
several incidents. It's not just happened once.
Yeah.
And I mean, the ship that was recently that the Finns impounded for severing one of these vessels had military grade communications equipment on board. There is again, the Russians probably learned from the Chinese as well, or they've been working together on it, is this idea of like a shadow fleet that is skirting sanctions, that is doing official government roles without the cover and operating as commercial. But, for example, with when the Russian frigate visited in Cape Town last year for the Navy Festival, everybody had their eyes on this Russian frigate.
Yes.
That came. It wasn't very impressive, in my opinion. A contact of mine who boarded the vessel told me that the ship's kind of held together with 200 kilometers of insulation tape. There was nothing digital in the bridge. He said it was impressive that the ship managed to get there because it was sailing on analog methods. There was just old school dials and switches, nothing, no GPS in the bridge whatsoever. But the ship that accompanied it was a auxiliary vessel called the Academic Passion.
Yeah.
Now, this is a ship that while the frigate was in Simonstown, took several trips around Cape Point, and this is also a ship that was suspected of espionage and shadowed the new French nuclear submarine when it was doing its sea trials. And there's also allegations that it was surveilling undersea cables in the Baltic. Now, there are a lot of undersea cables that go around our coastline, and I wouldn't be surprised if while the frigate was there, the auxiliary ship that was accompanying it was actually doing some sort of intelligence work and scanning and surveying the undersea cables around our coast. Because Russia doesn't rely on undersea cables. All of their internet cables are over land. Mainly the Western world relies on undersea cables. So it is a vulnerability that is very big for us and for the Western world, but not for Russia. And undersea cables are a separate conversation.
It was such a sensational thing to happen. Like within 2 months, there was a movie out or a sitcom or something like that that used that as the base of its show. A few moments ago, you were telling us about some information that was supposed to be passed on to relevant authorities to intercept a boat with methamphetamine coming into South Africa. And there was an intelligence or communication failure at that point, and as a result, we weren't able to act effectively. Let's talk about the intelligence cluster as a whole.
This is a touchy one.
Yeah, I mean, I understand there may be, for example, you may be subject to gag orders. What's the word I'm looking for?
The main problem with the FA is that they are just, the only thing they're really good at is just not talking.
Yeah.
So there's not a lot of information out. A big problem at the moment is that there is, under the current administration and in Parliament, there is no Joint Standing Committee on Intelligence. It hasn't been constituted. The Ad hoc Committee on Intelligence is kind of just there. And we don't really have a Minister of Intelligence either. We have a Minister in the Presidency who juggles it amongst, her corruption trial, being spokesperson for Cabinet, and I don't know what else she's doing, but she's way too overwhelmed to be running the intelligence agency and has, in my opinion, done it quite a disservice. I've heard from some people within the organization that they're not very happy with the way that she talks to staff. There have been orders in December that they're trying to clear house. There were a lot of people that were brought in under the administration through nepotism appointments and illegitimate hires in the organization, kind of just to, as part of the capturing of it. All this came out in the state capture report, but the way some of the staff was kind of pulled together in December and told, like, okay, listen, everybody over 50, you're going to take voluntary retrenchment now, or we'll go through the retrenchment process. And I think a lot of the bad people are trying to get pushed out that way, but they're also kind of pushing a lot of the good people out because they're just saying, you're over 50 and they want to make room. But she keeps saying in her questions about what is happening with the SSA, that they're preparing for the separation into the domestic and the foreign branch ahead of the signing of GILAB, the General Intelligence Law Amendments Bill. Now, it's been 10 months since that bill was put on the president's desk, and it's been lauded as, this is a vital bill that needs to be signed and all that. The president still hasn't signed it. So currently, as it stands, nobody really knows where our intelligence services are sitting, because it's supposed to be now the South African Intelligence Service and South African Intelligence Agency. Domestic and foreign branches focusing on their respective tasks, but we've just been told they're implementing the recommendations from the Zondo Commission, and they're getting the ground ready for the signing of GILAB. But this has been the answer now for 10 months, and we don't really know what's happening with our intelligence capability.
Between diminished capacity during the Zuma era and the information provided by the Zondo Commission, we definitely, and in relation to the state of readiness for July riots, I think it's fair to say that, like the National Prosecuting Authority, the intelligence cluster was probably wiped down to an absolute minimum of ability to function. The people that are in there are largely, or not largely, but there's a huge impact on made by cadre deployment. And then, as evidenced by the minister herself, you have a situation where, like Becky Cele, you have a minister who is never a policeman, or a minister of defense who is never a soldier, or a minister of health who isn't a doctor or a nurse. And I think we can quite fairly say that the whole thing's in pretty much a state of shambles.
Yeah, in my opinion, knowing that there are still some people within the organization that are pretty good at their job, but they're also getting towards retirement age, and the capability for future skills and future human resources is completely diminished. The state security agency and our intelligence apparatus is at a point where it effectively has to be rebuilt from scratch. Now, this is not something that happens often, but it is not something that happens rarely, like too rarely as well. The Ukrainians, after 2014, when they had their revolution, and I forgot what the president's name was, when he fled to Russia. There's an article in the New York Times about the man who was a high-ranking member of the intelligence services, who then came into work the next day and found the building abandoned and paper shredders going nuts and bins on fire and hard drives with ripped out of computers that had been drilled through, and he was the only person there. Like, everybody else had fled, and he had to, with the assistance from the UK and the US, rebuild Ukraine's entire intelligence apparatus. I think we're in a similar situation where we're going to have to rebuild it from scratch, but we can't do it alone. But we need to be able to lean on our friends, and we don't really know who our friends are at the moment. I think we've been in international space. We've done a bad job of that in the current state. And yeah, I think our intelligence capacity is very far from where it should be.
Yeah, I'm not going to get into geopolitics, but we have.
Why not? I'd love to.
Yeah, we just don't have enough time. But we've definitely started aligning ourselves with China and Iran and Russia. I mean, Russia's a wartime economy. That
is sinking. And
yeah, that's sinking.
At the same time.
And not only that, but even though the ANC itself during the apartheid era had a very close relationship with the KGB and the KGB handbook, for that matter of fact. And they were obviously trained by them, and they had a close relationship in terms of being communist allies. In the modern era, Russia's not interested in us. They're not going to give us any capability. They're not lending us anything. They're not...
The thing that the ANC forgets is that they were assisted by the Soviet Union, and Russia today is not the Soviet Union. And there were other countries in the Soviet Union that provided an equal amount of assistance, such as Ukraine, East Germany. And
that's why I find this whole thing that many of the cadres forgot that they were trained and housed in Ukraine. I couldn't believe it.
And I love that people say cadre deployment, because when I first saw the phrase and read it in my mind, the way I pronounced it rings a lot more true to what it actually is, and it's cadre.
Yeah, cadre.
And that's... it really, if I look at it that way, and that's really how they treat everything. It's that, it's all about the cadres. And this has really been a problem, specifically with our relationship with Russia, because, again, so many of the ANC members lived in Ukraine. The Ukrainians provided so much assistance. I mean, a lot of the AK-style rifles that you find on the street today are East German of origin. The Russians did not put a lot of effort into the ANC, and the fact that the ANC will drop anything for the Russians truly infuriates me. I've heard from attachés from fellow African countries how, we always talk at SADC and at the AU about our African brothers, but when it comes to intelligence sharing, we share absolutely nothing with our fellow African countries, but we are very open towards sharing with the Russians and the Chinese.
Yeah, I mean, for me, Russia and China, they're extractive. They don't have good intentions for South Africa. They don't intend to be long-term partners. China's got issues, its very own issues with Central Command, 99-year lease, aging population. They're not a good country to build a long-term intelligence cluster network with necessarily. We just seem to be cutting too many people out. I think India is the country at the moment inside BRICS that does by far the best to get the best out of each trade agreement, including the support of their intelligence clusters.
Yeah. Look, I think the best thing for South Africa to do is to maintain a good relationship with as many countries as possible.
Absolutely.
We can't afford to scorn anyone, and we can't afford to favor one country over another.
Absolutely.
And it's one thing we need to realize with our relations with Russia and China. China is our biggest trade partner, but China is not a military partner. We need to keep it as a trade relationship. And with Russia as well, Russia's not even a top 20 trade partner. We don't owe Russia anything.
we actually do incredibly well. We actually profit off the trade with America, whereas with China, there's obviously a trade deficit. We're actually not as doing well off China as they are off us. Like I said, they're extractive. I need to move on simply because like this is some of my favorite stuff. I've been waiting to get around to these two questions for ages. There's very few people that are prepared to speak about it or can. I forget her name, Yasmin Opperman.
Jasmine Opperman, yes.
Jasmine, sorry. I would love to speak to her at some stage. I know that she has a wealth of knowledge on the conflict in Mozambique, but there's very few people that can or will speak about it. So I'm just going to hit this. The conflict in Mozambique and South Africa. I was talking to a South African who represents a minority community in the country, and I said to him quite controversially a while ago that one of their biggest security problems is that they're clustering too many of their citizens inside a small space, and they're making themselves vulnerable to terrorist attack. You can't just go and pick out one or two of them. You can literally go at any given time to a place and you can get hundreds at a time. And I believe that there is a growing rise of extremist threats, especially coming up through Mozambique. They're moving down across the border towards South Africa. And I believe that they have their eyes on South Africa and that there's already the possibility that organizations like Boko Haram and ISIS have ghost cells that are operating silently in South Africa, even if it's only for the purposes of intelligence gathering or network building, or maybe just for financial benefit. Maybe they're able to move a little bit of money or assets or something like that. And I believe they're already here. I've got no evidence of this.
There is very strong evidence that they are here. There are some sanctioned individuals that were sanctioned by the US for links to terrorist organizations.
I remember there was one very prolific person.
There's four currently, most recently. I mean, taking back to the Rogue Special Forces unit, they apparently kidnapped a suspected ISIS financier who's an Ethiopian.
That was individual. From the shopping mall.
Mall of Africa.
Mall of Africa.
Yes. I believe it was Christmas Day of all days. There are terrorist groups active in South Africa. What saves us from becoming a place where they start going on the offensive is that we are a place where they are able to generate income and to finance other operations. So at the current moment, those operations are in that they are conducting are geared towards supporting operations throughout Africa. There have been links towards individuals that are operating in Durban and Cape Town and Johannesburg that are not South Africans, but are linked to terrorist cells that are operating in Mozambique, the Eastern DRC, Somalia, Kenya, Somalia and Ethiopia, and also up into the Sahel region with Boko Haram and Islamic State of the Maghreb, and in North Africa as well. And Africa is currently the place where there is the largest growing sense of extremist terrorism. Also, the number of attacks seems to be increasing, but with Mozambique, the crucial thing to emphasize, and I said this with a co-wrote a piece with a colleague of mine, a very good friend, Dr. Marcus Visevich. He's now at the University of Prague. But, we basically said that the mission in Mozambique wasn't over. It was too soon to withdraw. And we published that piece in Defense Web, and a week later, there was a renewed terrorist offensive. I mean, there was propaganda footage that came out in January showing them cutting off a couple heads in Mozambique. But one country where things are starting to look like a bit of a concern that not many people are paying attention to is Malawi. Malawi is right next to Mozambique. It's the poorest country in the region. And there's a growing presence that is occurring there. But also with the instability in Mozambique and seeing how things are flowing through the country, a lot of it's going west from Cabo Delgado towards Malawi. I know a lot of other European countries that have defense attaches in the region are worried about Malawi. I am personally a bit concerned because I feel that the South African National Defence Force did kill quite a few members of the Islamic State group in Mozambique, and the fight isn't over in my opinion. I think there is a growing threat, and with the nature of our porous borders, I I think there is a possibility that they will be able to move through the region without us even noticing. We're not equipped for a large-scale counterinsurgency on our domestic front. And I think it is a bigger issue than the issue in the DRC in some way where we should be paying a lot more attention.
I feel it's a much more imminent and pressing issue than what's going on in the DRC. I completely agree with you that we have regional obligations, not just for the sake of humanity, but for the sake of, let's say, limiting the diaspora or migration of people that may end up harming our economy or our citizens' well-being as a whole. But Mozambique for me is just incredibly concerning. It's right on our doorstep, and it's not a national act. You're not acting against the sovereign state. It's far more fluid and it's far more dynamic than that. At any given moment, you can get a splinter cell who turns around and says, we don't need to generate money in South Africa. We need to generate dead bodies. And all of a sudden, things could turn on its head very, very quickly, given the fact that our policing is poor, intelligence clusters are poor, the Border Management Agency doing a good job, although having some difficulty. And just our complete lack of readiness to deal with anything on this kind of scale. And it was why I said to this gentleman, you guys are completely exposed. He said, no, we use top private security guys and we bring guys in from this country and that country. And I said to him, look, that guy can be well trained, but if you think his cute little Glock 19 with his backup clip and his bulletproof jacket's going to be any good against
Yeah, there is, again, there's a large concern about it, and you're not the only one who has the concern. I'm not the only one who has the concern. I think there is a possibility in the near future of an attempt to establish another ISIS caliphate somewhere in Africa. Areas like Mozambique, Somalia, Malawi, and the Sahel are where it's likely to happen. We are seeing with climate change how it's driving people towards cities and making resources scarcer in areas where resources and government presence is already scarce, like northern Mozambique. I mean, you've got the government protecting the Total gas plant. The Rwandans are there protecting it with the Mozambique government, but they're not there to protect the civilian populace. So that was something where Samim came in and where our forces came in, was that we were there to kind of stabilize, but we didn't fulfill that task. And now with the growing instability in Mozambique and the dissatisfaction with the government and the government's neglect of that region, it's going to drive people towards these extremist groups.
Yeah, I just don't see any possibility as long as the conflict goes on, given the shape of South Africa, a bit of a strange thing to say, but given the shape of the Southern African continental border, if there's enough conflict going on in Mozambique, we're simply going to get after a while an arrival, first of all, of citizens that are just fleeing for their own safety, but also militants that are looking to shelter themselves and regroup.
We are not prepared for the threats we face. It is a fact, and I think that things could be turned around relatively quickly. People think I'm an optimist when I say that, if budget commitments are made and there is an influx of cash and a stabilization fund, or basically a stimulus for the defense force, and the right people are put in charge and the right strategies are adopted, I think it's possible to turn things around within 8 years. The
structures are definitely still in place, the basic structures. So I would most certainly agree with that, and I would go as far as saying that to a very large extent. I would say that about most sectors in South Africa, like I say that about NHI, I don't want to get off track, but we don't need NHI. We just need to correct the structure that we've got at the moment, and we'll do quite well.
I'll say it again. We need to get our shit together.
Yeah, look, we South Africa's definitely suffered from a leadership vacuum in recent years, and if I can make one more point before I move on in relation to the mismanagement of our Army, Navy, Air Force, the ANC leadership that came in the post-apartheid era, if we look back in hindsight, had absolutely no hope of managing those systems properly. They had to take people that, to some extent, had never even managed their own finances. They'd been in exile for so long in foreign countries. They were getting funded by other people and cared for. And all of a sudden, you had people that, look, they might have had a little bit of military training by the KGB or a little bit here and there, but you're not talking about lifetime military leadership. And as a result, in hindsight, we can see why things just weren't properly led. The people were simply not in place.
The end of a revolution is never good for the revolutionary. That is, it's just from an observation of mine. And you can see it now with the young generation of fighters that were in the Taliban in Afghanistan. When they they kicked the Americans out, they won. And now they suddenly have to work desks and answer phone calls and, they have to deal with Microsoft Teams and Outlook.
That's why communists say the revolution never ends.
Yeah, and then they're like, hey, this isn't what I fought for. I thought I was going to be a martyr. Now I'm here answering phones all day. This sucks. Ultimately, it's never good for the revolutionary, and it's a difficult thing. And the former chief of the Defense Force, Lindile Yam, even said himself, the Soviets didn't teach us how to lead an army.
Yeah,
they didn't teach us how to spend money. Some people are aware of it. Some people don't want to admit that mistake. But I think the big problem that the ANC has run into there is that they don't want to ask for help. And now with the GNU, and I mean, even in the defense sector, there's been a lot of offer from assistance from other private industry, military players, in not private military companies, but defense companies to help out with the null and to help out with our equipment maintenance and sustainability of our air and naval fleets. There has been assistance offered from other countries that has largely gone ignored because nobody wants to ask for help in the ANC.
Yeah, we're very arrogant in terms of that.
I wouldn't say, but there is a level of pride that is starting to bite us in the ass.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with that. We have not done well with our... The point of diplomacy is to make sure that your country does well in any given deal. And we simply haven't done well in terms of broad diplomacy. In any given deal, South Africa usually ends up coming off second best.
There have been some good ones, like, the Lesotho Highlands Water Project. Yeah. Lesotho is the country getting screwed over there. Like, we're not the one getting screwed over there. Also, within SADC, I think the idea or the concept behind what SADC is trying to achieve is largely beneficial to us as the largest economy in the region and the most industrialized in the continent. BRICS, the fact that we are included in BRICS actually gives us an opportunity to punch well above our weight and gives us an opportunity to be seen and to operate as a middle power. And the government has these ambitions, but they don't have the follow-through and the commitment to actually implement what they're trying to do. I applaud the government for wanting to be a regional security actor and guarantor. I think we do have that responsibility.
Yes.
The old government spent a lot of time and money destabilizing the region, and for us to try and correct that is, in my opinion, vital. It is something that we owe to our region. But yeah, again, the government's follow through on these things is where there's been a lot of the disappointment and where we've been lacking.
I couldn't agree more. I think South Africa is ready for a fresh young crop of energetic, vigorous, educated young leaders, regardless of race, creed, culture. We have a dying breed of donkey politicians that simply were never prepared for the job and never will be.
So I ran for parliament under the
I actually saw that briefly in your bio for Rise Mzansi. Can I tell you, we actually have a thing where we don't bring politicians on, and I'll tell you why we don't bring politicians. Is one of the fundamentals for the show is that any guest on the show must be a subject matter expert in something. And you're the first politician, I'm going to say now, ex-politician that I would say is a subject matter expert in anything. So
I wouldn't call myself, I'd call myself an aspiring politician. But I think what South Africa needs is we need more people in parliament that aren't there for ideological reasons, but there to serve their country. And that was what I was trying to do, and something I hope to achieve in my life is to give back to my country and to serve my country in a way. And I think we need more administrative politicians who are just there to do a job. Once they've done the job, grace
A few more
period.
technocrats would really,
Yes, I think
help.
we need to professionalize our legislative branch that way. I think, we need people that are there to do a job. I look at Dr. Pieter Groenewald, the current Minister of Correctional Services.
The longest running minister ever.
No, longest running. He's been the longest serving member of Parliament.
Sorry,
he's been in
sorry.
Parliament since '94. But if you look at how he's running the Department of Corrections, he's just there to do a job and to do the job well. And I think we need more people like that.
I'm even shocked by guys like Gayton McKenzie. Look, he's sometimes radical. You may agree with him or you may not agree with him.
He's an interesting character.
But when he came into his position, he came in with energy and he was out on the streets doing his job. And people were like, what? Yeah. He wasn't even doing a particularly good job, but just that he was there doing it has shocked and amazed people.
I have a lot of respect for the current Minister of Police, Senzo Ngunu, because he's doing a good job there as well. Like, his first day in the job was also my first day in the job at Protection Web, and the first thing I did was go to his press briefing. And a week before, or about 2 weeks before, the Institute for Security Studies published a paper, recommendations to the incoming police minister, whoever it is, literally just 20-page bullet points. And I read that policy, and I thought, it's a to-do list. It looks good. And then when I went to his first press briefing and I listened to him outline his priorities, I had that document with me and I looked at it. And he read that document. And I think it's good to have a minister who realized, he comes from an education background. He was previously in water and sanitation. And then they put him in police. And I was like, I'm going to give him a bit of a grace period. And I wanted to see what he would do. And he's been doing, in my opinion, a very good job. I think he has to wrestle a lot with the SAP's higher command. But he's not making promises. He's trying to do the best that he can. And he's not coming there like Becky Clele, coming into
photo shoot
with the photo shoot with these, shiny shoes and his fedora. Oh, look at me, I'm at a crime scene.
The minister of hats.
He comes to talk to families and he listens to people. He isn't making outlandish provinces and statements that say, police should kill and all these things. He's trying to do a good job, and I think he is doing a good job. And I think we need more ministers like that.
I've definitely noticed his presence, and what I will say is that in itself is a miracle. He's the first chief of police who I've come in and seen him doing actual police work. Clearly had a presence, but it wasn't. He didn't feel like a policeman. He just wasn't interested in doing the job properly. He was all about the lifestyle. Sorry.
Yeah, this is one thing that as someone who would love to be Minister of Defence but hasn't been a soldier, I think people need to remember that you don't always need someone leading the department that has done the job. You need someone who understands the institution, understands the department and what it needs to achieve, and is a good leader and a good manager. And I think we need more of those in government. And I think that there are some ministers that we are starting to see that are operating like that and are doing good jobs. We just need more of them in Parliament.
Agreed. People that are just good at doing the basics, the boring fundamentals of politics, that really boring stuff. Because that's the thing about politics. Populist politics has obviously been the name of the game in South Africa for the last 20 years. And when you have a look at real politics, the nitty gritty of service delivery, it's absolutely as boring as hell. It's filling the potholes, it's getting the paperwork done on time, it's doing the press release. It's boring. There's nothing fancy. There's no blue lights involved. There's no guest speakers. It's really boring. So I can understand why.
And we got the municipal elections coming up next year. Being a ward councillor is the most thankless job in government, and I think we owe them a lot of respect, specifically the ones that do a good job. I know here in Joburg you guys have a pretty dysfunctional city council, but ward councillors have the biggest impact and the most direct contact with their constituents, and get none of the thanks.
I said that I got absolutely minced in a live conversation with a bunch of postgraduate students a couple of months ago, because everyone was complaining about Donald Trump. Donald Trump doesn't, and I said everyone's overreacting a little bit to Donald Trump. I said your local ward councillor has an infinitely bigger impact, direct impact on your life. And I'm not joking, the conversation just blew directly past them. They said, but what about this? And he's going to do that. It's like, okay.
Yeah. If you are on a WhatsApp group with your local ward councillor for your ward, and I am, and mine has just resigned, there's a by-election coming, seeing how when the power is out unscheduled for more than 6 hours, how people are quick to throw some really sharp words at him, remembering that, like, hey, he's not the electrician who's going to have to replace that cable, but he's doing his best to make sure people can.
Yeah,
At the end of the day, he's just a human being.
They get absolutely minced.
Yeah,
they get absolutely minced.
It's rough out there, and I mean, I've been asked if I would run for a ward councillor, and I absolutely not. It is, as I said, it is a thankless job, but it is one of the most important jobs.
I was also asked a while ago, coincidentally, and I said to them at the time, the problem is that you have to pledge political allegiance, and I said I just don't feel comfortable with pledging allegiance to your particular party or any for that matter of fact. The problem is that once I pledge allegiance to a party, it makes it very difficult for me to be a political commentator, because then I'm kind of in a position, I would say, sort of like Mike Sham, where you know exactly what his political position is, you know more or less who he votes for and what he does. I like to kind of pull that like neutral line a little bit more if I can.
And we need that from more South Africans. I think people need to realize that it's country over party. The political party allegiance is not the be all and end all. Ultimately, at the end of the day, we're all in the same boat, and we need to work together. And that's where in the political sphere, talking about defence is such an important thing. And I mean, I've had conversations with Carl Niehaus about this. I've spoken to members of the EFF.
I see him sometimes in Rosebank. I never have the courage to go speak to him.
He's a lovely guy. He's on a personal level, getting to talk to him, he's a pretty good chap. He's a nice guy to chat to. He understands his role in the Defence Committee, and he's doing a stellar job on the Defence Committee, in my opinion. But he also understands that the Defence Committee is a place where political party allegiance and party ideology stays at the door. This is a national issue. This is an all hands on deck issue. We are all in the same boat here. There's no such thing as differing ideological opinions about the state of our defence force. Everybody understands that it's bad and something needs to be done. And there is no time to say, oh, but my party views it this way. No, this is a national issue. We are all on the same page here.
He surprises me from time to time. We don't agree on most things. He's obviously a communist. I'm more of a free market capitalist, so it's on many issues we aren't going to see eye to eye. But from time to time, Carl Niehaus does surprise with a little bit of wisdom.
Day, we're all South Africans.
Yeah. I don't mind the EFF. I quite enjoy. I've had the pleasure of meeting Julius and Ndlozi, and I find, obviously Ndlozi is no longer there, but I find the EFF to be part of a vibrant and healthy democracy. I just wouldn't want Julius to be in charge of the intelligence cluster or defense force anytime soon. Maybe like some other cabinet position. The flow of guns, because we're talking about policing before we got a little bit sidetracked, the flow of guns in South Africa, we've spoken about the flow of drugs, we know more or less about that. The flow of illegal guns in South Africa, we obviously know that the military loses a fair amount every year, private citizens lose a fair amount every year, and the police lose a fair amount every year. Are there a lot coming across our borders?
There are a lot of firearms being lost by the police. And it's not just their service weapons, like I did ask the
it's the storage lockers that are going missing.
I did ask the National Commissioner this at a press briefing, like, are you able, like, how do you know if you're recovering firearms that you've lost? And he said, no, it's hard to tell. The serial numbers are filed off, but at the end of the day, if someone is coming up with a Vector pistol or an R5, that's a police issue weapon. You'll know, even if the serial number scratched off, like, hey, these were only made for the police. So I didn't buy his excuse there. But the police are also, the weapons that end up in evidence or that are being licensed or that have been handed over.
Yeah, we had the issue with Norwood.
Norwood SAPS is particularly the worst of the lot.
I see they just arrested the station commander. A couple of days ago.
So Norwood SAPS is nationally the worst in terms of keeping track of firearms. It has been single-handedly pointed out as the station that loses the most firearms. Sandef isn't losing that many. Sandef is losing a couple dozen in a midterm period. They're very, very stringent about recovering stolen firearms. Or lost firearms. It's a very big deal because these are automatic firearms. So they take it seriously. But also private security companies lose them as well, in the same way as police do. So, I know of an incident that occurred not far from here in Linden at Brian Lara, where a drunk police officer that was off duty left his firearm in the bathroom and came back later to get it. this sort of thing doesn't just happen with police officers, but again with security officers in cash and transit situations, their firearms get taken from them.
Yes.
Now there are also illegal firearms that are smuggled into the country. As I mentioned, there are a lot of East German origin AKs that are in South Africa. These are things that are left over from the Cold War. I mean,
and are they coming from Mozambique?
Mozambique. They're also coming from Angola.
And Angola as well.
Just remember, during the Cold War, with the border war era, the Soviets flooded the region with a lot of AKs.
Yes.
There's a reason why Mozambique's got an AK on their flag. Like, the region was the proliferation of Soviet origin firearms in the region is astonishing. I mean, if you follow SAPs on Twitter regularly, they'll be like, "Oh, we recovered this pistol," and it's like a Chinese or Soviet origin pistol from the Cold War era, and the number of them that should be in a museum is astonishing.
I was in a shootout not so long ago, and the guy surprisingly had a very old Russian weapon, like a Tokarov or something.
Yeah.
A weird pistol with a weird caliber as well. I also
Yeah.
thought to myself, where did he get the rounds from?
And you'll see in like when SAPS recovers these firearms, is that pistol will be them. It'll be like 4 rounds in the magazine, and like the rounds are rusted and the pistol's rusted. But these things have been around for years.
Yeah.
And it's the TT-38s, your Makarov pistols, your Tokarevs, and the Chinese copies of them as well. There are thousands and thousands of them in the region. Same with AKs. I'm just glad that there isn't a large number of PKMs and RPKs on the street. But there are just so many of these weapons that have been produced and flooded into the region anytime there's a conflict that the one thing is they have a habit of working no matter how bad you treat them, so they are around for a while.
Gun-free South Africa, they're obviously on one side of the coin. They just want to get rid of all the guns. I think that's a hopeless argument. That's never going to happen, given the fact that
Look, as long as your police officers and your military have firearms, and even if they are losing one firearm a year, as long as they are losing them, there are still going to be guns.
Yeah.
And until we live in a world where nobody has a firearm, there are going to be firearms.
Yeah, I think it's a ridiculous argument to say ban them all, we're going to get rid of them all. I think it's very naive. Having said that, where would you say would be the biggest area, if you could do anything, if you were the Minister of Firearms for one day and you could just do one thing that you think would have the biggest impact across the board in terms of limiting the flow? I'm going to say the flow of illegal firearms.
I think that one of the most vital things to do, the first step that is going to help, is digitizing SAPS's firearms registry.
Central Firearms Registry. Whoa.
Yeah, digitize the Central Firearms Registry, but also establish the way the Americans do, where they have a law enforcement agency specifically for handling firearms.
We did have that at one stage in South Africa a long time ago, or am I incorrect about that?
That is not an area of expertise of mine.
I could be wrong. I could easily be wrong about that.
To have an agency that is specifically there to handle the registry of firearms. I mean, we have the Department of Motor Vehicles under the Department of Transport that handles vehicle licensing, and it has the Metro Cops and the Traffic Cops. To have a department that is there to not only handle the private ownership of firearms, but to manage nationally where all the firearms are, that every firearm that is in the country that is registered to a law enforcement agency, to the military, to a private entity, to a security company, that every single one of those serial numbers is in a database and is managed, and that there is oversight, that people, SIRA is for security companies, it's supposed to come check once a year where all their firearms are, what's the state of them, and they're not allowed more than one firearm per officer. So, like, if a firearm's not working, then that officer doesn't have a firearm. There's not like a spare one that they can give him. But to know where all our guns are, what the state of them is, who has them, who's responsible for them, and to have some level of oversight over that.
I mean, I've been into one particular SAPS store where they had a bunch of Z88s, and
that's the one, the Vector Z88, the Beretta copy that the police still use. If you see one of those on the street and it's not in a police officer's hands, it's likely a pistol lost by the police.
They have 2 serial numbers on those, one on the frame, one on the slide, and I was just sitting there in the store just messing around, and turn the first one over, different slide, different frame. Next one, different slide, different frame. So at one stage, the gunsmiths had obviously just interchanged the parts. And I thought to myself, well, these things even work properly.
Yeah, and this is something I spoke to Andrew Fuller about, and it's about the firearm management within, because at the International Firearm Training Academy, and with him, they've got a new firearm custodian course, and they did a pilot program with Department of Corrections to help them maintain and manage their own firearms, so that they have a higher level of efficiency and availability of their firearms, so that they work when they need them to. and we was talking about because he came from a military background as an ordnance and a firearm maintainer in the military, about SAPS's firearms, and he said they've been trying to work with SAPS to maintain their firearms, and it's astonishing that how poor the firearm management is within SAPS. And he's mentioned multiple instances where they were trying to the bluing process, the finishing on the firearms,
bluing,
and they disassembled a bunch of firearms without taking note of which parts went to which gun, and they just took like a bunch of them and put them in the liquid solution for the bluing, and then when they tried to put them back together, they had no idea which parts went where, and ended up with a bit of a Frankenstein situation where they started with 500 working R5s, and then they ended up with a couple of hundred working in a pile of spare parts that they couldn't get to fit together because there was just no management of the parts and organization around it. And it is a big problem at SAPS. It's a big problem in SANDF as well. But again, another thing people don't want to talk about is a lot of these firearms that we've got are getting old.
Yeah.
Guns,
no, all the time. I mean,
they're old. I mean, the last Vector production line closed in 2000.
I'm absolutely astonished at the rubbish that our police are forced to carry on a daily basis. First of all, I don't think it's right in the modern age to make, especially given how out of shape a lot of our police officers are, full-size steel weapons when you could get them something that weighs half the amount with a higher shot capacity. This simply is poor logic. You buy 2 plastic guns for every steel one. They've been proven to last. The officers are less fatigued. They don't have to carry the extra weight around. And you just see them all day long with these absolute donkey dinosaur.
Let's not even get to talking about the body armor plates in SAPS and SANDF. That would be another topic. But the management of equipment in the police, it's not just bad in the firearm space. And Ian Cameron recently did a visit to the public order policing unit down in the Cape, and only about 20% of their vehicles were available.
I see it, because I was talking about the obviously the big equipment like ships and things like that, but just the little things on the
firearms and boots and body armor and helmets.
I mean, we have police. None of our police, or very few of them, unless they buy them themselves, get Kydex holsters. I mean, they're still using these old Kojura holsters and things like that. It's.
I mean, our soldiers don't get issued with tourniquets. They don't get issued with individual first aid kits. Yeah. So that is a very modern military thing that everybody has an individual first aid kit.
No, it's an IFAC.
An IFAC. SANDF doesn't issue IFACs. They don't issue tourniquets. If you ever see a soldier with a tourniquet, it's
bought
a personal purchase. Boots, there's the standard issue boots are in such short supply and of such bad quality that most soldiers are wearing privately purchased boots. When it comes to body armor, a lot of the plates that are being used are from batches that were purchased in 94 and 2000, and that is it. Those are the most recent purchases for body armor.
And do those deteriorate with time?
They do. Okay. Yeah, it's ceramic.
Steel.
It's ceramic and steel as well, but they're heavy and they get dropped a lot. Yeah. So the integrity, I mean, it's better than nothing, but I would want a newer plate to stop a bullet than one that's been dropped 50 times in the last month at the store. And it's a steel plate with a ceramic cover. And I mean, a lot of soldiers are using their own body armor. And if you look at, I have a picture that I posted of an R5 that was being used by a Pathfinder that was escorting us at Lohatla in November. It was quite Gucci'd out, and it was all personal purchase. Because the other guy in his unit was using an R5 that had a wooden foregrip from a Galil short that somehow ended up in inventory, and when they were servicing the rifle and they needed to replace the forend, it ended up with, it was a bit of a Franken R5. It had a R4 stock, same one, but like none of the parts were from that rifle. It was astonishing.
We don't have too much time left. I'd like to move on to a question around using the military for the regulation and control of zama-zamas in South Africa. But before we move on there, I'll just give you a quick little story. My dad was in the military. He vehemently objected the apartheid era. He was an activist. He got arrested a couple of times. He got into a bit of trouble. And when he left the army, he was worried that South Africa would go to civil war, and they used to actually use your serial number from your rifle at that stage of the day as your soldier serial number. And you used to hand your rifle back into storage, and that was how they would actually register you in the day before digital systems. And and he actually managed to get into that store, and he stole that. It was a Belgian FN R1 rifle, and he stole that R1 from the military, and he kept that as his bedside home defense weapon till he left.
Ever give it back?
He did. He gave it back. He actually handed it over to police, believe it or not, before he exited South Africa. I can only tell you this because he's dead now.
May he rest in peace.
Yeah, bless him.
That was a crazy.
Yeah, and I remember he still got rounds for it when I was a kid, a bunch of rounds, and we went to our farm in Magaliesburg at that stage of the day, and we went and shot it. But that was his bedside, and that's how we avoided going back if South Africa ever got called up to a civil war. I'm sure the systems are more sophisticated now.
That is an astonishing story.
Yeah.
With the Zamazamas, look, they are using members of the light infantry formation. Well, under the infantry formation, the light infantry units and the reserve units. The problem therein is that SANDF's mandate is only to assist the police in times of a national emergency.
And there's no national emergency declared.
It's not a national emergency. What it is highlighting is the shortfalls of SAPS and the need for a medium force between the military and the police, a gendarme. A couple African countries, particularly ones that were former French colonies, have gendarmes.
SWAT force, or
well, not really. It's more of a militarized police force. So SAPS kind of already looks like a gendarme and operates like a gendarme, but it isn't equipped and expected to be a gendarme. But I like what the Portuguese do, and the French as well with their gendarme, where towns of a certain size are run by the police. So anything over a populace, I think in France it's 50,000 people. If you have more than that in your town, it's run by the metropolitan police. And outside in the rural areas and on the highways and regional roads, it's the gendarme. And they also do the border security, and they do ports of entry. And Portugal has the Republican Guard, which does the same thing. Italy's got the Carabinieri and all that. And that sort of force is probably what we need in our rural areas and for combating illegal mining and
is that in a sense what public order policing is supposed to be? The POP, they have the red badges, the red bearer shoulder.
But in essence, that's more of what you're looking at there is more something that is going to be like a metropolitan police.
Crowd
I think
control.
SAPS needs a restructuring and a reorganization, but the concept for a gendarme and that type of role, and that would be assisting the police and doing rural security. There is a concept for it within SANDF that has been mentioned in Parliament a couple of times. Recently, in the Joint Standing Committee hearing on the reserves, they mentioned that there's the concept of the Mzansi Home Guard, where they want to, and the problem here is that they were looking at it again as a way of dealing with unemployment, is to bring people into this organization, which is not a way of dealing with unemployment, but to have this medium force that kind of does the rural security, the border security, assists the police, and operates along critical infrastructure nodes like highways and railways.
So there's actually a mandate issue with the SANDF and Zamazamas, essentially.
Yes, it's a mandate issue, but it's a lack of mandate on SAPS's behalf, or where SAPS isn't able to fulfill their mandate there, and they're having to rely on the SANDF, and then SANDF's budget doesn't get increased, and SAPS gets an extra 7 billion.
It has to be multi-pronged anyway. SAPs are useless without the guys that administer home affairs and things like that. You need everybody working together. I'm just not sure, because everybody's basically saying call in the army and let the army just flatten these guys, but it'll turn into Vietnam because they're also basically operating their own
What I
will.
think we should do is, I like the idea of a gendarme and the Mzansi Home Guard, but I wouldn't structure it with SANDF personnel. I would structure it under the Department of Defense, but not within SANDF, but have it be personnel from SAPS that you are recruited through the police and budgeted by the police. Because again, SAPS is this year, for the next financial year, is getting 120 billion rand. I think they can afford it. And they want another 10,000 police officers. Take those 10,000 police officers and the funding for them, put them in a structure where they are trained and equipped by SANDF to assist the police under a separate branch or a separate structure, where you're not having soldiers assist the police, and their training is specific to the roles that SAPS
domestic roles.
Yeah.
It's very interesting that you say that. I think that we need a force that has a gentler touch, is basically what you're saying, but also a big hammer.
Well,
essentially.
SANDF is the hammer.
Yeah.
SAPS is supposed to be the baton. I think what we need is the Shambok in the middle there, to assist in those areas. I mean, policing in a metropolitan area or in a city or like Joburg or Durban or Cape Town, it's very different from somewhere like Port Adder, or very different from a rural area like Mpumalanga, outside of Nelspruit, in those areas like Hazyview and Mullalon. The policing needs in those areas are completely different from somewhere like Cape Town. And we need more than one policing strategy. I think SAPS needs to reassess a metropolitan and an urban policing strategy and a rural policing strategy.
Yeah, rural policing is its own whole.
Yeah, because whereas in an urban area, you're working out of your police station or you're working out of your car and you're on the beat and you're reacting to things and you're not traveling very far. But in rural areas, your office is your vehicle, and you have to go very large distances, and you're dealing with very different crime.
Yeah, you're spot on about that. And I think that's something that a lot of people don't think about very often at all. You kind of just have one blanket image of what police should be, not realizing that South Africa, because of its vast geographical differences and also South Africa's immense intersectionality. For example, Calvin Rafadi was talking about tribalism inside different policing areas, and you can say that it's wrong, but at the end of the day, it has an impact on the ground, and these things do need to be catered for.
Yeah. So what again, I bring it back to Portugal. Portugal's got 3 police units. They got the judicial police, who are your investigative police officers, your detective branch, but they're not under the Department of Police. They are under the Department of Justice. They work directly with the prosecuting authorities and the judges. So that handover in the investigation and evidence and prosecution is
better synergy.
There's a much better synergy there. Then you got your metropolitan police, who are within the cities, and they walk the beat and they do the traffic crimes, and they're your response police. Then you got your Republican Guard, who are your rural police that do border security. They're at ports of entry. They're along highways, and they're
different
in
equipment, different training, different mandates, different everything.
Everything. And I think South Africa needs to start having a look at an approach like that.
Yeah, we certainly haven't done well. Our policing seems to be very disjointed. All these weird metro police.
Police have too much political power. I mean, the police have in the security cluster, SAPS got 100 for this next financial year. It's got 120 billion rand. The corrections has got, I think, I don't know, maybe less than 10 billion.
Yep.
But then SANDF's got 55. And every year it's like, no, there's a problem with crime. SAPS needs more money. Without a question, they get their budget.
Before we move on, for me, I've always said, don't hire more policemen. Take that budget, take the police we've got now, pay them better, and equipment them better. And I think we
have enough police officers that we just need to do better with them.
Yeah, I have the same sort of feeling. But look, getting employment for young people is very generous.
In the economy.
Yeah, it helps with elections coming up. That's going to be quite a nice one. We're going to hire 10,000 more people instead of just equipping them better. Makes a nice tagline for whoever those fat cats are. We shifting quite radically to a different topic now, and I don't want to get into conspiracy theories. I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but there has been some murmurs of the possibility, rising possibility of tensions inside Zimbabwe that could potentially lead to a military coup, given the situation there at the moment. And those are internal analysts that have. Are you aware of anything like this? Any dynamics that would concern you?
I'm aware of that there's some tensions. I'm aware of. Look, I don't deal a lot with the Zimbabwean military attaché. I've met the outgoing one. I don't know who's going to be replacing him. But Zimbabwe is definitely a situation where we need to be paying very strict attention and need to be prepared for political changes. If we look at when they set up SANDF in the 90s, they set it up with this belief that we'd never again be involved in a foreign conflict, and immediately Operation Bulias, there was a coup and political instability in Lesotho, and we had to military intervene to restore order. I think if there were to be a similar situation with Zimbabwe, we would be in very big trouble.
We wouldn't be able to act now.
Because also, if you look just geographically, I mean, Harare is on the other side of Zimbabwe from the border with us.
Yeah, we are not in a good position to act in almost any capacity anymore. I remember that South Africa had an amazing show during the Mozambique floods 25 odd years ago. There was that baby that was born in the tree that got rescued by the helicopter, and wow, did South Africa have just the most amazing press day ever. We just looked like
the heroes.
we just looked like the super sophisticated, organized African country. And if that happened tomorrow, that baby would not survive because we wouldn't be able to get that helicopter out. And it's more or less the same story for what you're kind of talking about now, that if we did have to intervene in a military coup, we don't have the capacity that we had 20 years ago.
No, we don't just have the capacity, but I don't think we have the, I could use the word clout. We don't have the legitimacy where if we did intervene, that like, hey, we're doing it with a mandate from, say, the African Union or SADC to restore order and protect the government, given that the current government is also been accused of stealing elections and itself came into power in a coup and not exactly viewed internationally as legitimate by most countries. And it was a general, so a little bit of a military dictatorship at the moment, in my opinion. It's not a democracy and it's not fair. But if we were to intervene because there's a humanitarian crisis and there's been a military coup, who would be intervening to defend which side? And it's a very tricky situation where it's very complex, and I hope we don't have to deal with such a situation because it's not going to be pretty.
Also, I mean, the worst thing that could happen to South Africa right now, other than our own civil war, would be a civil war right on our borders, where South Africa is at an absolute breaking point, and we simply couldn't handle a huge violent conflict right on our border with moving populations and the kind of toll that it would ultimately take on our economy. It could be the death knell for South Africa as we know it if that were to occur. So that is slightly concerning. Still a lot less concerning than what's happening in Mozambique.
Yeah, look, I'm an eternal optimist. I think there are a lot of things we need to worry about, but we've yet to see situations where our biggest fears have materialized, even in almost any scenario. And I think, given the resilience of South African people, we are going to be okay. We just need to get our shit together.
Yeah, and I'm also an optimist in terms of that is pretty weird. On a macroeconomic and macro global level, I'm an optimist, but on a day-to-day granular level, I'm a pessimist. I'm going to cluster the last two questions into just one general kind of a conversation, and it has to do with the rising tensions in Europe, obviously associated primarily with Ukraine and Russia, and now the European Union, who is seeming to kind of step up its concretization of capacity, let's call it, military capacity. They're also putting on as much pressure as they can in terms of sanctions and economic forces that they can apply. And I'd also like to talk about that within the even broader global context of tensions between China, Russia, and the US, and just see if we can zoom out and see where we are at the moment with your thoughts on global military tensions.
So the war in Ukraine is really at a point where neither side is winning. Russia is actually finally running low on tanks. You're seeing what we're seeing on the Eastern Front is that tanks are becoming more valuable than personnel. Commanders are getting in trouble if they lose a tank versus a squad. Russia does have a larger manpower pool. I think they can't sustain the war any further without a full mobilization, which I think will just push their economy over the edge. I think considering they already, as soon as they realized it wasn't going to be a 3-day operation, they went 180 on the war machine. They can't ramp up their production any further than they can. How Russia is sustaining the war now is really their max output. I don't think everybody's saying, Russia's got so much more that it can throw out. I really don't think so. The evidence points to the fact that they've recently crossed over the estimated casualty amount for Russia. Just crossed the 900,000 mark. Russia's lost over 10,000 tanks, over 20,000 artillery pieces. Their stockpile is running low. they're not able with sanctions to generate new equipment. And I think they are not going to be getting any more of Ukraine. Like if we look at the amount of territory that they have conquered, I think Ukraine captured in the space of a month, reconquered more territory the territory that they captured in Kursk when that operation began was more than Russia had captured in Ukraine in the entire previous year. They are incrementally at snail's pace moving across the front line, and they are paying for it dearly. And the Ukrainians are also, their losses are high. It's nowhere near the number of Russian losses. It's always going to be heavier for the attacker because they're the one that has to get out of the trench. But I think the front lines, they have been very stagnant, and I think there is been moves towards a ceasefire, but so far the only indications have been that Russia and Ukraine are open towards a 30-day ceasefire in the Black Sea.
Yes, I see that's recently was put on the table.
Not on the front line. I think a ceasefire or an end to this conflict is far off. I know Trump says he was going to come in and fix it in a day. I don't know when that day is going to start, but it's
been in for a while.
It's been in for a while, or at least 3 months. But I think the conflict may take a pause. I think both sides need a pause, and it's going to be used to consolidate their positions and recoup their losses and rebuild their structures. I do not see this being an end to the war. I think conflict in Europe may pause for a bit. I see the parallels that we're seeing now is very much to Europe in the 1930s, where to me this is like them taking Czechoslovakia and Austria and the Germans, sorry. And I think Putin isn't done.
I coincidentally have stated before that I feel the push for Putin to recapture old Soviet territories is secondly ideological. I think his primary thing is an economic pressure. Given Russia's population growth rate, they're simply going to run out of food in the next couple of decades.
But remember, Russia's a very large country. They've got a lot of resources. And I think, Ukraine is the breadbasket of Europe.
But not agriculture. Like it's the one thing Russia doesn't have is the ability to just grow food. Most of their tundra is frozen, and it's.
And Ukraine's the breadbasket of Europe. So most of the world's wheat comes from. But there's also a lot of critical minerals in the Donbass that Russia would love to have access to, and would rather Ukraine didn't have. But the big problem with Ukraine is it's very hard to oppress your people when there's a prosperous, free country across the board and people get to see what life is like there.
No one's ever escaped a democracy to go to a communist country.
Well, it was one guy in the US Army during the Korean War.
Yeah, I remember
one guy.
I remember watching a documentary about him recently. Very interesting. He ended up living a pretty obscure life.
Yeah, and there was one American soldier who defected to the Soviets because he saw them. Sorry, who defected towards the Nazis because he saw them as the only thing stopping communism. It was a very weird thing in World War II. There's always an oddball out somewhere. Putin has this imperialist mindset. You can see the way he talks with longing about the Soviet Union and Russia's imperial sphere.
Yeah.
And I think he's getting old and he wants to leave a legacy and he wants to recapture and rebuild Russia as this great power. But all he's really done is knock over his own Jenga tower.
He's an ideologue in the same way that many of the ANC, senior ANC politicians are communist ideologues. May he rest in peace, Pravin Gordon is obviously no longer with him. But I mean, for me, he was an absolute example of this, where he pulled that ideology all the way to the end. He would not bend, even when he was in public service and trying his best to be a good public servant, and from time to time doing a reasonably good job. He still couldn't bend from the ideology. And for me, he's cut from the same cloth. Putin's cut from that hardline communist. They actually wear tweed jackets with elbow patches. They're not like Floyd Chivambu, who's a communist on Monday morning, but a Bentley driving, Hennessy drinking capitalist.
Mercedes Marxists.
Yeah.
There's, I think people that still hold on to that Cold War era communist view must remember that in the current day, an easy way to say it, the proletariat is mugh.
Yeah.
And we live in a very different world. The Cold War's over.
Yeah.
But he's got ambition for Russia that I think is badly got a very bad grounding. I think he needs to. I think the Europeans are going to give him quite the licking. People are saying, "Oh, Europe can't defend itself," but Europe NATO without the US in it
is still a considerable
large.
superpower.
There's a YouTuber by the name of Perun who did a thing about the concept of a European military. And he crunched the numbers. If you include Turkey into it, and you drum up all of the reserves and the active forces across the entirety of NATO, you're sitting with an army of about 4 million strong. Now, it has its own problems. It has its logistical constraints. It has operational inefficiencies. It has lack of certain critical equipment. Not everyone has the necessary special equipment. And they need to find a strategy where countries are focusing on their strengths. For example, Estonia is a cyber power. France and the UK are nuclear powers. Poland is likely going to be Europe's land army. They're sitting with an army of around a million strong, multiple divisions, large numbers of tanks. And Portugal is out there on the periphery, but it's got a very good Marine Corps and very good naval tactics. The Italians and the Greeks have fairly strong navies. And then Turkey as well has got a pretty potent air force, pretty strong army, and a pretty good navy as well.
I'm not, I don't know why, but I'm not necessarily worried about a global war anytime soon with Russia. Russia and China would really have to be committed, given the fact that they're in such deep financial positions themselves. They're in both, their people aren't doing necessarily well. And for either one of them to go into a full-scale global war, I just don't see it happening anytime soon. And then, of course, there's obviously the economic trade impacts with the US and China. People, when people say to me, I lose sleep about what if US and China, it's like the two biggest trade partners in the world, like just dropping everything and going to war tomorrow. It's like, relax, you can go back to bed.
But remember, that happened already in history with Japan and the US in World War II, and with Europe and the wars in Europe, and then America getting pulled in there as well. I think people forget how quickly war can happen, how close it can get, and how global it can get. But the thing about the World War II, people think it's not just that it erupted everywhere at once. It started a little bit in Europe. It started a little bit. The war in the Pacific in World War II started in 1935, I think. And Japan had their own thing going there, and then there was the wars in the Germans, starting to slowly grab pieces of Europe, and then you had the Italians in Africa and the Germans in Africa, and it was a while before it became a world war.
Yeah.
And if we have now a conflict in Europe, okay, and we've got already a growing conflict in the Middle East, we've got instability in Africa, and then a spark kicks off in Asia. I think we're going to be into it a while before we realize that we're sitting with a global interconnected complex layer of conflict.
I think in some ways we're already in that conflict. So I think that we have already entered World War III.
Yeah. In a way we have.
Yeah, I believe it's no war is the vision of any generation as it lives at the time, because you always have wars a vision of a generation before, if that makes any sense. So for World War II,
retrospectively.
Yeah, World War II they expected trenches like in World War One.
In World War One, they thought it was going to be a quick war. Everybody had colourful uniforms, was riding on horseback. 4 years later, everybody's wearing grey and brown and dark green, and they're in trenches covered in mud with machine guns and chemical weapons. War changes, and the how history evolves and how it all plays out is very different from what, even the war in Ukraine. Everybody thought Russia was just going to walk over Ukraine and be done in 3 days.
That's what I thought. I thought they were going to come in there, whump them in a week or two, and then it would be to the negotiating table. And then I thought to myself, when that didn't happen, I said, okay, well, they'll win in a year or two on the war of attrition.
Yeah.
And now that's not happening either.
I remember when the war broke out, my phone started going nuts with news notifications and people messaging me, and I rolled over and I looked at my wife and I said, this is not going to be over in 3 days.
Yeah.
It's not going to be over in a month. Yeah. It's not going to be over in a year. This is going to be a years-long conflict. I said to that friend of mine, Dr. Sosevich, I said to him, if they can make it through the first month, I think they can make it longer. I think they just, in that Ukraine did, in that first month, they held the Russians back.
They've done incredibly well to implement asymmetrical warfare. They've just done really well. They have an imaginative, and it just goes to show the capability of the Ukrainian population as a whole, young, educated, well-connected.
But not just that, motivated.
Yeah.
You know, like the Russian soldiers are just, you know, they don't know what they're fighting for.
There's absolutely no motivation.
Yeah.
There's been a complete collapse of public sentiment from within Russia, and the Russian propaganda machine hasn't been able to do well enough to quell that sentiment. They measure it; it's growing on a daily basis.
And it's for the Russians, it's, you know, why am I being sent to Ukraine? What am I trying to achieve? Those for the Ukrainians, it's, hey, I'm fighting for this village. I live in.
100%.
This is my town.
I completely agree with you.
And that's the thing. Like in a war, the side that usually wins is the side that's best motivated. It's the side that really believes in what they're fighting for. And when you're fighting for your home and your family and the street you live on, I think, I although the Ukrainians may not win every battle, and they may have a lot of damage done to their economy and their country, I think ultimately they are going to come out of this the winners, even if they have to, you know, some land stays in Russian hands and it doesn't end the way they wanted to. The fact that they have stood up to what was believed to be the second most powerful military in a year, and they've given them almost 1 million casualties, and they've held them off for 3 years. That's fucking impressive.
That's a fantastic soundbite, and I'm definitely going to edit that into a standalone short. I will be getting abuse from all sides of the political spectrum. We've kind of run out of time. This is now the longest interview we've ever done. We usually cap them at 2 hours. We're into about 2.5 now. And I just want to ask you, you know, where can we find you in the future if there's somebody that's looking to follow you or get a little bit more information on what you provide?
You can find me on Twitter at OneTrueRicardo and on Instagram at TheOneTrueRicardo. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm not on Facebook because I am under 30 years old. You can find me at Defense Web and Protection Web. You can look out for my name there, subscribe to the newsletters. I'm very active on Instagram. I should post on my story. I post a lot of memes about the current geopolitical sphere, and I try to make light. You know, I think if we're going through all these dark things and these constant, unprecedented moments, a little bit of humor goes a long way. Joe, you can find me there. Defense Web does have a podcast in the works as well. Okay. That will be coming out in the coming weeks. I'm not supposed to be doing this, but the name that we've got is Frontline South. It'll be a podcast that is focusing on conflict and defense and security in the global South, and particularly in Africa. And I'm looking forward to launching that project.
That sounds absolutely fantastic. You're certainly becoming increasingly more prominent in the space. I've noticed your rise a little bit, and I hope your career continues to grow. You're certainly a very valuable aspect of South Africa's intellect within your specialization.
I try to do my best, and another thing, I hope to run again for Parliament. I think we need more people in government that are willing to do the dirty, well, not the dirty work, but to do the paperwork and
boring work,
and to sit in committee meetings. And I would love to get back to my country and to help fix our national defense apparatus.
It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. You've been a truly remarkable source of knowledge. You've been very forthcoming with everything, and thank you so much for being with us, man.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it a lot.
Thank you.
I'm Aidan Brown. This is Ricardo Teixeira. Find him on his socials. Thank you very much for joining us today. Aidan, Ricardo, Ben Matjiu in the studio, and we'll see you guys in the near future. Bye for now.